So guys, what if Naruto got harem with multiple women in RWBY universe special movie? He had become incredibly bored, filled with anxious energy, wanting to release it, but alas, there was nothing he could currently do. Naruto was a mess at this current time, sweat dripping from his pores, finishing his mundane workout. Still, it wasn't enough to release the energy he felt pent up within. Maybe he needed Hinata. Damn, she's working on the details with her clan, he murmured to himself, brushing his hand through his hair. Are we really ready for this? Am I? He sighed softly as he gazed through the thicketed trees and toward the clouded sky. For as excited as he was for finally having someone who wanted to be with him, he was coming to terms with that sensation. Did he have feelings for Hinata? He wasn't so sure. There was the sensation when she nearly sacrificed herself to protect him. That reaction was the most visceral he had experienced, and then there was the incident with Toneri kidnapping Hinata. But there was still this lingering feeling that he wasn't sure how to describe. Was she the one for him? For so long, he had thought Sakura was the one, but he had given up on her so long ago when she was so strictly hung up on Sasuke. He began looking elsewhere, noticing others. Recognizing that the others were beautiful and he had been missing out. How did he not notice Ino was so busty and that fantastic figure? Damn, that she and Sai were now a thing. Tamari accentuated her hips with those outfits of hers. No wonder Shikamaru and her were a thing now, or Tenten with her lovely, supple BU. Oh, what was he thinking about the moment? This wasn't helping him, it was only adding to his anxiety and his issues. He would have to fix this issue later himself. A cold shower wouldn't be enough. Unfortunately, he really wanted to see what Hinata was like, but he restrained only to their play as per her wishes. She wanted to wait until the moment was right, and that was fair, but he was ready to bust now, filled with raw, masculine. Was this how Jiraiya felt all the time? Was this why he always went to the hot springs and the red light districts? Admiring all the women. Enjoying them. I am starting to understand Ero Sennin more and more by the day, Naruto muttered, taking a deep breath before a light smile graced his lips. Wonder if he's found an onsen in the pure world. Probably has. Chuckling at his words, letting the sun's rays wash over him through the foliage, a content sensation washed over him, almost as if he felt his master's presence with him one more time. Yeah, this does feel right, but I can't help but feel a little off, ya know? Naruto spoke, his eyes closing as the sun caressed his cheeks. A lot has happened, things have changed, but everything is going all right, just trying to adjust to everything now. Kakashi is running the village well, still has a heavy void in his life without your books, however. Might have to pull out that script we wrote together on our trip to keep him happy. Naruto guffawed, a smirk crossing his lips as he lowered his head, his bangs covering his eyes. Tsunade finally stepped down and is running the hospital full time. But you know, it feels like without you here, it feels like she hasn't been the same either. Think she misses you. And so do I. Despite everything, following in your footsteps and living up to your legacy, living up to what you hope I could become, and now, I've come to an impasse. Naruto returned his gaze to the sky, and his eyes reopened, a confused glint within his eyes. Ya know. I am not sure if this is what I want, you know. I've worked so hard for all of this, and I have someone who loves me, but I can't say the same myself. You always told me to play the field to find that special one. Funny enough, Tsunade has been saying I should slow down, take my time and make sure Hinata is the one, explore my options, and check out some of the village's women. I am not sure how I feel about that. Naruto frowned before letting out a chuckle. You sure you haven't been whispering to her in her sleep? Sounds like something you would say, besides saying lotion is in the basket. Otherwise, everything has been mostly fine. Still learning from the seals from the scrolls you left behind for me and from the Uzumaki manor here that you conveniently forgot to mention to me. Naruto barked before holding back his vitriol. Well, got a new clansman to help me with that even if she only shows up now and then. Strangely, we have a good relationship with Otto and Orochimaru now. Not sure how to feel about that after everything he's done. Feeling the wind blow and a gentle caress him, he closed his eyes. It was almost as if he was receiving a calming answer from his master. But then the wind picked up. The velocity increased to such a degree his eyes snapped open as he braced himself, planting to the ground with chakra as his eyes snapped open. Was he under attack? With wind? There were only so few people that were attuned with wind, so someone attacking him with it was bold. He was one of the most powerful people in the world who could use all elements. And wind was his specialty. So, who would be so bold? Why am I glowing? Naruto immediately caught something unusual as a wild vortex swirled around him. It wasn't the usual glow he was accustomed to. This wasn't the gold energy from Kurama's golden cloak when he used his chakra. The fox was quiet within, taking a nap to recover energy after the battle against Toneri since he had to expend a significant amount. It was silver. What was this? While it was emanating from where he expected, his right prosthetic arm, he was still surprised. The mark had reappeared beneath the wrapping and was glowing vibrantly. Was Hagoromo trying to reach him once more? Was Sasuke having the same reaction? Should he find his friend to see what the situation was? Did another Otsutsuki arrive for them to deal with? He knew it hadn't recharged since the last time he had used it, and the power was slowly accruing, but for it to suddenly surge like this once more. Maybe he needed to sit down and meditate. Perhaps that would allow him to reach the old man if he was trying to contact him. Ma. Where are you, Sasuke? Naruto flicked his left hand through his hair, noticing the glow engulfing him as the wind swallowed him. Is this happening to you too? Hope this has something to do with the old man Hagoromo, but if it does, Ma. At least I am not gonna be bored, at least. Naruto tried to spin an upbeat tale on this as if this was what he expected. He would be talking to the old man here in a minute. How wrong he was when silver blinding light filled the entire forest, and he heard a scream that caught him off guard. No. And his life changed as Uzumaki Naruto disappeared from the forest, only a trace of silver specks of light lingering where he once remained. She was too late. She had come to help her friend after hearing from John what she had done, finding out who had caused all of this, only to lock him into a locker and send him to Vale, fearing he would be in danger if he joined her. To face it alone, she didn't want to leave her alone, she had to help her, join her. But now, even with Weiss' assistance to climb the tower, her friend burned, seared a golden hue as the woman she had run into at this very tower months earlier placed her hand on her. This was all her fault. She could have stopped this all those months ago, had realized it was this woman all along. But now she was watching her friend burn alive before her eyes and couldn't react. Fear froze her in place and gripped RWBY's heart. All she wanted to do was help her friends, enjoy their time together. Be her team's leader. But now, during this crisis, she couldn't do anything to save a friend. She was worthless. Unworthy. All she wanted was to protect everyone that mattered to her. After what she saw with Penny, she didn't want to see it happen again. And yet, why couldn't she be a heroine like her mother? A hero like her father? Like Uncle Kirao? She was a failure. She couldn't even live up to all those stories they read to her when she was a child, to the greatest hero of all in all the fairy tales, one her mother loved to read to her and Yang over and over. The brothers of the sun and moon. Silver light gleamed within her eyes, a single wish filled her heart as tears stained her cheeks. Roses burst from around her as she dashed forward, crescent rose in hand as she pushed past her fear even as her head felt like it was splitting apart. RWBY refused to give up, she couldn't. Not until every breath was drawn from her, until their weapons and shields lay broken before them. She would not yield. Pyrrha. No. Falling to her knees right before her goal, RWBY screamed as silver light erupted from her eyes and engulfed the tower, bathing everyone in its light. Everything to get to this moment had been so glorious, so meticulous, and while agonizing at times, it finally came to fruition. She was the Fall Maiden, the plan had fallen into place. Chaos reigned in the streets of Vale, and while she knew the city and quite possibly the school could very well recover, she was one step closer to her goal. Once she eliminated this pest, she could reach her next goal and find the Pyrrha. No. Another pest to stamp out. She let out a pitiful sigh, predictable. The girl of roses that caused Roman so much trouble, of course, it would be. He couldn't take care of her yet again. Why have the others around if I have to do it all myself? Yet the moment her eyes turned to react to the girl, confident she could handle anything the young huntress could throw her direction, something happened she wasn't expecting. Cinder's eyes widened, the girl fell to her knees before her. What was this? Was she already giving up? This thought made her smirk. Had she realized she was already too late? A silver glow emanated from the girl, and it was far too late. She was engulfed within it, and she stumbled within its blinding rays. What is this? Cinder screamed, feeling an intense burn raging through her being. The intensity caused her skin to feel like it was smoldering and self-immolating. Like her, The powers she had just obtained spontaneously been used against her and set her ablaze. What was this light? Why was it causing the powers she had to rebel against? Breathing and panting heavily as the light faded, her vision blurred, and Cinder snarled. This would not do. That girl would not be allowed to humiliate and harm her like this. She would finish her just like that redhead and set her world on fire. She would burn and the air rushed from her lungs. A familiar sensation buried itself into her sternum, one she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a fist. She knew that shape, but what she couldn't believe was. She felt every inch of it, and it rippled through her entirety. Her aura crackled as she felt her head and back smack into solid stone and metal as she went through it. What was this? Who could hit her this? Heat burned around her. Fire erupted from her hands as she steadied and halted the momentum. Floating in the air, amber eyes burned furiously, seething as a new figure stood on the tower, sternly gazing upon her and locking his brilliant cerulean gaze with hers. Standing before her goal, and she would treat him like she treated everyone else. Like the ant he truly was. Where was he? What was this? As the silver light faded, this was something he had not expected. A frown formed. Okay. This was not what he predicted. Instead of standing before Hagoromo once more, expecting to hear some imminent danger was upon them once again. Was he on top of a tower? In a burning city? Was that a wyvern flying in the sky? And was that girl being seared alive? What was this? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but looking at her resigned face and the setting around him. Naruto acted on gut instinct, with a swift movement. Applying chakra to his fist, he separated the woman staggered over the wounded warrior. It was more than enough to do what it needed. It wasn't even the strongest, but it was more than enough. He noticed an odd crackle around her as she was sent flying through the wreckage that spread through this tower and over the edge. But when a flare of burning energy seared around her as a fire burned from the palms of her hands, correcting her momentum and allowing her to float in the sky, Naruto simply glared at the woman. Those eyes, he knew those eyes well. The eyes that desire revenge at all costs. They held a seething, burning rage and were willing to do whatever it took to achieve it, and burn everything in her way. Naruto knew she was likely someone at fault for the burning of this city. He could feel that within his very soul. He would not let her get away with this, but first. He would not give her the dignity of allowing her to take her prey, if he indeed had his full array back. It would be a simple matter to revert what she had done as he placed his right hand on the glowing warrior. It's two. The girl's words echoed in his ears as golden flakes flickered off her skin. Nothing could save her at this point. This was her destiny. A gasp escaped her lips as something pulsed through her. A strange aura she had never experienced before, but the heat she felt within her evaporated. Vanished, cooled, her eyes shimmered, the glow was no more. The flakes were no longer. His hand moved from her forehead, and her hands snapped before her. She couldn't believe this. He had reverted what she had done to her. Healed the burns in an instant? Pyrrha's gaze turned to him, astonishment written on her face. Who are you? Naruto only smiled widely, noticing a second young girl kneeling beside them, looking upon him in stunned silence, her mouth moving but words failing to form. Strangely, despite what he had done, her eyes quivered at his presence and not his action, and he noted that for later, as every time he had performed such a miracle before, it had surprised all around him. And those silver eyes, that receding silver glow within them. It matched the glow he saw surrounding him. Well, he had some clues to go on. To those that are my friends and in need of assistance, they can call Uzumaki Naruto. For my enemies and those that cause chaos, Naruto grinned before gazing at the woman floating in the sky above, stunned at the reversal of the damage she had inflicted. They can call me their worst nightmare. All the ants dare oppose me today. Cinder's voice echoed as she snarled, a fire burning around her eyes before she darted toward them with a blazing trail behind her. Fine. I burn you all to ashes. Two glass swords forged with heat in her hands, her intent clear. But not as clear as the stunned surprise as her wrist was clasped from the side, her amber eyes meeting orange eyes as she turned her head. The disbelief in her eyes was all that he needed to see. She was far too confident in her skills and couldn't comprehend how he was already at her side. This wasn't even gonna be a challenge for him. With a flick of his arm upward and then down, he carefully tossed her through the tower with precision. He sensed that no one was inside, so there was no harm in throwing her through the entire building. Before realizing the shockwave of his toss nearly sent both the black-haired and red-haired girls flying and he winced. He could see they were trained to an extent, but he underestimated how strong this form was. He hadn't used it in quite some time and never tried to use it against anyone who couldn't handle it before. Naruto hadn't even put much effort into the toss as he wasn't aiming to kill the woman. He wanted her alive so she would face the consequences of her actions. Death often was a mercy, one he was not willing to oblige, just yet. He wanted to know. After seeing those eyes, gazing upon the scene, a brilliant golden glow erupted around him, and everything came into focus. The negativity was crushing this place, strange creatures roaming this place in the city. People attacking civilians alongside them, with only a few defending everyone. There was only so much they could do. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, with a whisper, several copies emerged around him. They didn't need to be told twice. They knew exactly what to do as they dispersed in flickers of golden light. This was a crisis, and while he wasn't sure what was happening or where he was, he knew what to do. Save as many people as he could from this invasion. It reminded him too much when the sound invaded Konoha. A scream echoed as fire ruptured from the hole he sent the woman down. Naruto pursed his lips in amusement. Was she seriously coming up the same path he knocked her down? That was the least tactical thing she could do in this situation. Did the rage within her burn so brightly that she lost all? A roar caught his attention, and darkness descended upon him. It had two massive wings and sharp teeth. Oh, right. Wyvern. Naruto took his attention away from Cinder while 9 balls forged around him, one sending straight through the beast while another descended directly in the path she was coming from. As a massive hole opened through the wyvern and blew the giant creature back, an intense flash of flames that shot from the pit, melting everything in its path, was suddenly drawn into it, wrapping around it like the core of a star. Absorbing the heat until nothing was left, only for Cinder to burst past it, flying with her blades at the ready. To stop once more as she was caught in his grasp. By the throat. What was this kid? And why was he glistening gold like he had transformed? Her world darkened as she felt another blow connect to her temple, but as she fell to the world below, she saw something that horrified her. The ancient Grim fell from the sky as the person who had interfered with her creating something she couldn't fathom. An attack generating such much pressure that Naruto had raised his right hand into the air, a single blue orb forming at first, only for 3 more to develop, orbiting around it. Might be overkill here if it could take that hit, but to ensure this thing doesn't come back, I am gonna leave nothing left behind. Naruto focused on the wyvern and made his move. The world stood still as he vanished from sight, only for him to reappear before the falling wyvern one more, the attack in hand as he drove it into it, and it disintegrated as a shockwave that obliterated it down to every molecule that made contact. A gale ripped through Beacon, shifting and swaying the tower as the explosion tore through the Grim and turned to dust. Glass shattered in every building. Many people were blown back and carried by the winds. As the clouds in the heavens above the tower were parted, pain filled every fiber of her body. She lay in agony on the cold concrete below her. The sky was torn asunder by that golden boy. Her goal was close to fruition, but he had to come out of nowhere, after the girl of roses and that strange silver light inflicted such pain upon her. And now she could barely budge in the crater she lay in. She couldn't keep flying from that blast, it was too overwhelming, and the moment she was able to regain any semblance of control. Blood dripped from her temple, pooling behind her. She was sure she hit head first, not the most elegant way to land, but she was alive. She still had her scroll. Thanks to Arthur, she had a closed network and could contact her team, so if she could reach it. You know it's over, right? Cinder froze her hand that was desperately reaching up toward the pocket near her breasts where she kept her scroll. That voice, had he already found her? No. This couldn't be how it ended. Not after everything she had suffered through, for it to end like this. This world deserved to burn. Share in her pain. You've been through a lot, haven't you? Naruto's empathic voice resonated. I feel such great negativity coming from you, but there's more, isn't there? I can feel it. I saw it earlier when our gazes met. If you want to talk. What would you ever know about suffering? Cinder's gaze met with his, finding the boy, now in the state she first saw him. You know nothing. Do not speak to me of things you cannot fathom. This world will share in my misery and burn for it. It will suffer for its crimes. Her fury only grew brighter. He dared give her a knowing smile? She would have his head. I might understand more than you would ever know. Naruto's voice was but a whisper. Walking toward with purpose as a single blade was pulled from his pouch, but I've grown to know the damage that will can do. I am not willing to let others suffer for it. Cinder's eyes shimmered as cold steel was the last thing she saw. That and a pair of cerulean eyes that held a pitying glint within. I am sorry it had to be this way. Being assisted by her friend with walking down toward the evacuation point, they both were thoroughly shaken by what had taken place, unable to express what they had seen or felt. Ruby had so many questions. She knew Pyrrha had them, too, but it wasn't like she could answer any of them. How could she explain anything that happened? That she believed that she summoned? Ruby. Pyrrha. Weiss' voice echoed in Ruby's ears, her teammate rushing toward them before noticing their condition. You both are mostly okay. Thank OM. Here, let me help. Ruby is in worse condition than I am. Pyrrha tilted her head toward Ruby. That guy did something to me and restored me. I should be standing here right now. Seeing the downtrodden expression and forlorn gaze coming from Pyrrha, Weiss flinched before nodding, helping with Ruby, moving her to Blake's side. She softly smiled at her friends. I am just so glad to see you both made it back. After that explosion, I was so worried. What was that? Blake growled, looking displeased, her bow depressed, refraining from looking over toward the unconscious member of their team. She was already guilty enough. Both Ruby and Pyrrha grimaced, glancing at one another. They were unsure of how to express what had happened. Blake scowled at this action. They knew something and was about to ask, but Weiss didn't see what she did. She simply continued. Whatever it was, I am thankful for that golden guy flickering about. He's been destroying all the remaining Grimm and fending off the rest of White Fang simultaneously. He was like a storm. No, a maelstrom. And he looked so. Seeing a dreamy glint washing over her teammate's face, Ruby blinked. This was new. Was Weiss, remnant to Weiss? Oh, what happened? Weiss snapped out of her stupor, scowling at her actions and frowning. What overcame me? I feel stressed, and you didn't help, Blake. Why did you have to try and leave like that? You're lucky he brought you back. Don't bring me into this. Blake screeched, looking quite displeased while holding her bandaged side, before grimacing as she gazed upon Yang again. Well, discuss it later. Just don't up and leave again, got it? Weiss glared at Blake with vitriol, making her friend shrink into herself. Ruby and Pyrrha shared another glance, unsure of what happened. However, Ruby, glancing at her teammates, knew she would have to do some damage control later as whatever it was. How's everything here? That voice. He was back. Ruby's eyes widened, her head snapped toward the voice. It was him. Holding out here. Sun greeted Naruto with a wave and a wide smile. Don't know where you came from, but glad you came when you did. You cleaned house. If you have some spare time after, say we get a drink or something. The least we owe you for saving our butts. Might hold you to that. Naruto gave a foxy grin, tilting his head. Doesn't sound bad right about now. That being said, there is a lot to sort out, have quite a lot to do. With his gaze falling upon Ruby, she winced and saw him frown. He knew she was why he was there, he had figured it out. But she didn't understand how, or why. She was always told her eyes were special. How could she know her eyes had the power to summon a character from one of her favorite fairy tales? Cleaning up the last of the creatures called Grimm was not a difficult task. They were easy to locate. They were beacons of negativity, and thanks to his sensory from Kurama, he could scour every single one. And he meant every single Grimm. It didn't matter where it was, he could find it. However, there was one in particular shrouded in darkness in the distance that had his interest. He would have investigated if he wasn't busy helping this city out or had his issues to deal with. Because these creatures were intriguing, beings of raw negative emotion. What was their origin? Where did they come from? And why did they turn to dust when killed, no matter how he killed them?
My planetary Rasengan was overkill if that wyvern was gonna disperse no matter what I did to it. Naruto flicked a kunai through a wolf before running his hair through his spiky locks. Wonder if that girl is okay. She suddenly passed out when I focused my attention on her when I was looking for clues as to why I was here. Hey, kind of reminds me of what happened to Hinata all those times when she tried talking to me early before she gained some courage. Hearing more growls, having sensed they were there, Naruto rolled his eyes while drawing forth another kunai to face. Just keep coming, don't ya? Got some strength in numbers. Time to take out the... With a single motion, the wolves were severed in half as a man with a great scythe stood between them, back turned from him, scythe on his shoulder. Almost as if he was stylishly posing. It was a good entrance, though, even if he saw the complete entrance and let the man have it, it was impressive. He gave it a 4 out of 5. Standing between the corpses of the creatures was a nice touch, and sheathing his weapon was a nice. Did his weapon transform into a greatsword as he sheathed it on his back? 5 out of 5. He wanted that sword. Trash. Huh. Neat. Naruto finished his sentence calmly, not allowing his giddiness of seeing such a magnificent weapon to tarnish this meeting. Didn't want to let the leash of the little kid inside of him and gush over the sword. He would ask to admire it later as he wasn't nearly as much of a weapon nerd as Tenten. Though, they did bond over it when they were in the academy when they were younger, he just preferred flashy jutsu. Hey, kid, the mon's gruff voice snapped Naruto from his thoughts and his wandering eyes away from his sword as crimson eyes peered into his. Appreciate what you've done here, but I've noticed something, and I've got some questions for you if you don't mind me asking. Nah, don't really mind all that much. Gathering intel while I am clearing out these bizarre creatures, Naruto shrugged, glancing around with a frown at the damage but sensing his clones, and the other huntsman, as they were called, was handling the remaining Grimm and had rounded up the White Fang. Bizarre, the man muttered, expressing bewilderment upon hearing and seeing this young man destroying the Grimm with unnerving ease yet not knowing didn't know what they were. Naruto could see it perplexed him, and with a grin, he slipped his kunai into his pouch before placing a hand on his hip. Yeah, don't mind answering some questions if you got some answers for me. A fair exchange, as I am quite confused on many things, as you can see. I was training to blow off some steam in the forest near my home before the next thing I knew, I was suddenly enveloped in a silver light and transported here, having to save everyone. You, why is it you? Burn, burn, why has everything gone so wrong? This wasn't supposed to be how this was supposed to end. I was supposed to be the one. Me. Now, you. I won't forgive you. I scorch you and make you suffer along with me. You don't deserve this gift. Everything was so hot. She burned. No, she felt like her skin was on fire. Nothing she did could get rid of the feeling. And why was she before her once again? Didn't he say she would no longer be an issue? Ruby. A worried voice echoed out, calling her name. Are you okay? Your bed has been rocking, Ruby. Weiss immediately pulled herself up to Ruby's bedside, her crystal eyes widened with fear upon the sight. Her friend was wildly thrashing about, sweat drenching and soaking her bedsheets. She had brought her back after she had passed out at the evacuation site, most likely from exhaustion from whatever had happened. With the word given by the professors, they were allowed to return to the dormitories, so she brought Ruby to rest while Blake went with Yang to the hospital. She could only hope that her friend didn't try to abandon them again, but that hardly was on her mind at the moment. Ruby. Weiss reached out, trying to snap her friend out of what she thought to be a traumatic nightmare. Only to recoil and draw her hand back, stumbling back and falling onto Blake's bunk when she grazed Ruby's shoulder. Her hand burned when she made contact with Ruby, as if she was. Ruby. Weiss heard Ruby scream in agony, snapping her out of shock from staring at her hand, her attention drawn back to her friend. Let me get help. Fumbling around for her scroll, panic settling in as her friend's cries filled the room, Weiss didn't know what to do, who to call. She was at a loss. Ruby. The door to their dorm burst open, Weiss dropping her scroll as Pyrrha nearly snapped their door in two as she entered their room, sword and shield drawn. Emerald eyes shimmered as they fell upon Ruby, seeing an all too familiar aura envelop her as her screams cried and echoed through the room, levitating off the bed, and Weiss was too stunned next to her bedside to notice this due to her arrival. Pyrrha did not hesitate, dragging Weiss to the ground, cradling her into her side as she held her shield above them. Pyrrha, what? Flames erupted, coursing through the room. Weiss' eyes flickered in horror as the fire burned around them, the shield doing enough to cover them from their wrath, but where did they come from? Ruby. Weiss screamed, a cold shiver traveling down her spine as her friend was caught in the flames dying around them. No. Ruby. I don't know what is happening. Pyrrha gritted as she flicked her shield, feeling the intensity dissipate, and grimaced at the state of the room before sighing in relief upon seeing sprinklers activate and put out the fires. And her friend lay uncomfortably, breathing heavily as the strange aura around her calmed. With Weiss noticing it, too, her eyes fell upon Pyrrha, looking for an explanation as Ren, Nora, and John all rushed into the room. Checking upon RWBY, frowning and seeing the same glow around her eyes, Pyrrha bit back a curse. It is what I feared. I don't know how it happened. But I need to find Professor Glinda immediately. Naruto couldn't imagine the marvel he was now standing before. He had seen some pretty marvels, but this was something beyond all of them. He knew something was up when he saw those mechanical men torn apart and deactivated all across the streets, but this was an airship. Something like this was only a dream pitched in movies or by the drunken bridge builder, Tazuna, stating he would craft the first ever one. All to prove it was possible to him and Inari when he last visited them. So where was he? This technology and everything he had seen around was impossible where he was from. Sure, Konoha was having a surge of industrial boom with tech and was beginning to advance at an alarming pace. But it was nowhere near as state-of-the-art as this. This was futuristic by all measures of the word. Where am I? Left Naruto's lips, his composure finally breaking and pointing at the airship. That should not be possible. Those things are just a theory. What is going on here? Hiro stumbled, crimson eyes shimmering in bafflement at what he heard. Kid, what are you going on about? This is, hey, calm down. Okay, where is that silver-eyed girl? Naruto ranted, turning around with a purpose and freezing Hiro. Allowing the world to flow through him, still mastering this form now that he had full access to its power again. He felt the world around him, searching for her presence. He could use Kurama's cloak to sense her, but if he kept relying on the fox, it would wake him up. And despite the situation, he wanted Kurama to rest after being taken to the brink. He deserved it, but if this called for it, he might need to converse and plan with him. Really, I don't know how her powers work. When I find her, I am gonna figure out how to reverse engineer the process and get back home. Naruto muttered, searching for her presence and scowling. There. Time to. What do you want with RWBY? What? Naruto's gaze reverted to Kiro, a scowl gracing his lips as that awesome greatsword of his was directly pointed at him. It, by no means, was threatening to him, but that deathly serious glint as he aimed toward him, and that stance told him everything he needed. He was protecting her. She was someone precious to him. So, he needed to de-escalate matters and explain, didn't want to ruin relations. Kiro. A door on the ship suddenly opened, and Naruto and Kiro's eyes shot to a tall woman as she exited the airship in a panicked rush. What is this? Never mind. We have an emergency. Kind of dealing with one. It's RWBY. The woman's shrill voice caused the mon's grasp of his sword to weaken and his gaze to quiver. Pyrrha just called me. I can't believe it. I don't understand it. But it's her. It's her. Dropping his sword aimed toward Naruto, Kiro quickly stepped toward the woman, trying to keep calm even if his voice betrayed him. Glinda. What do you mean it's her? What is? RWBY was the last one she thought of. Glinda's voice chilled Kiro to the bone. She's the inheritor, Kiro. He almost vomited. The moment he saw the kid was coming regardless, recognizing something was wrong with RWBY, he knew he couldn't stop him. He didn't understand why he was so fixated on her. One thing he could gauge was that he believed he didn't want to cause her harm. The kid was too open, too honest, wore his heart on his sleeve. Perhaps he could be guarded and hide secrets, sure, but he was still an available book. But from now on, he would never, ever again ask for his assistance if they were to travel together to get somewhere. He would go on his own 2 feet. What was that he did? They traveled from Vale to the dormitories in the blink of an eye. Didn't seem Glinda was faring any better as she swayed beside him, looking shaken and barely able to register where they were at the moment. He scarcely was able to notice the kid had reverted from that golden state he had seen him in while protecting Vale from the attack. What was this kid, and how did he? Oh, right. Kiro heard him mutter and narrowed his eyes, keeping his stomach from lurching, and swallowed hard to keep the bile from escaping. Not everyone can handle moving at such high speeds. The body and mind try adjusting to moving at such high velocities. Does remind me of the first few times Jiraiya-sensei had me travel through the body flicker. Kid, shut up, Kiro growled, standing tall before taking a deep breath and glaring at the blonde. I have so many more questions, you do realize that? Good, 'cause I have even more for you to answer. Naruto chirped, closing his eyes and giving Kakashi-sensei patent eye smile before tilting his head. I think we both realize I have no idea of anything going on and just acting on instinct. Then his eyes opened, and Kira went rigid. His crimson gaze was swallowed by the serious intent within the swelling oceans of the kid's ceruleans. But if something is endangering her, let's just say I am not gonna take too kindly to them until I figure out exactly what's happening here. Exiting her dorm, Kira let out a deep exhale as she walked into the burned wreckage of her RWBY's dorm room. Ruby was lying in bed with Weiss, Nora, and Ren, watching over her. It gave her the moment to leave, come over here and catch her bearings. Bringing her face into the palms of her hand, she took a deep breath to calm herself. She wanted to tell everyone else what the issue was, she really did. John unfortunately found out when he followed her and was dragged into the mess. It nearly killed him, it was why she sent him away. No, she was lying to herself. She knew deep down that despite everything she felt, she sent him away so she could fight to her fullest. Her feelings for him made her weak, and if he was there, she couldn't bring everything that she would have to worry about him. Care for him. Another sigh escaped as she closed her eyes and hung her head shamefully. It was cruel to think in such a manner. He was doing so well, had progressed so much in such a short time, and he was a great leader and tactician. He had many great qualities. But in that very moment, when it mattered the most, she felt he held her back. Kira hated that she felt this way. He didn't deserve this ridicule, he only deserved admiration for his courage and his rapid growth. He, after all, was the only person that didn't see her like everyone else. He saw her as Kira. John didn't see her as the invincible girl. Not that she was very invincible anymore, not after what she experienced and witnessed. She was far from invincible if someone like her could beat her. Or if someone like him could save her and everyone else from that woman and all of the Grimm. Just who was he? Kira. She winced. It was his voice. John followed her, and with her recent train of thought, her guilt racked her. She couldn't even look at him. Not after what she did to him. You don't have to explain what you did. John stepped into the room and toward her, the door clicking behind him. Examining the room, he flinched, and Kira couldn't blame him. She believed he was coming to understand what Ruby had inherited. Hanging his head, letting that thought fade, shame spread across his face. The past few hours have been on my mind on loop. I can't blame you after seeing what that woman could do. I would have only been a hindrance, and we both know it. I just wish I could have been more helpful, you know. We've worked so hard this year, and despite that, this happened, and in the end, it's not your fault, John. Kira bit back a sob, her emerald shimmer as she tried to hold back her tears as she finally faced him. There was nothing that could be done. It didn't matter what happened, because in the end, I failed too. I should have died, if it wasn't. What are you guys not telling me? The door slammed open, and Weiss snarled as her cold, icy blue eyes stared at the two of them. Seeing them flinch, her fists clenched, clearing the dormitory, heels clicking, she stood before Kira and gazed up into her emeralds with furious intent. Don't you dare withhold information from me. My friend just set our dorm on fire. What is wrong with her? What is happening here? What happened on the tower? Her words were cut short as the door did not close. Her eyes widened as a mystical aura began to repair and rift all the burn damage. Objects that seemed burned beyond recognition were returned to mint condition, all the water damage from the sprinklers gone. Professor. Kira gave a stunned expression as her eyes locked onto Glinda, standing in the middle of the doorway. A riding crop slid onto her waist belt. I thought you were in. I was. Got an instantaneous ride over here. Glinda glided into the room, taking control of the situation as she locked onto Weiss. Ms. Schnee, now isn't the time. Pressing Mr. Ark and Ms. Nikos for answers under such circumstances is unbecoming. I don't care. Weiss' voice was frigid as she snapped, unwilling to step back, and having picked this battle, my friend set my room on fire. What is wrong with her? Stop pretending I don't know that I don't see something that isn't normal. There was a strange aura around her that wasn't hers. What was that? Tell me exactly how the room was set on fire. A voice that froze Kira to spot as she had been thinking of him as well before everyone entered the room. And as all eyes were brought to the doorway, a spiky-haired blonde was leaning against the door with an inquisitive expression, for I might have an answer. But that will leave me with more questions than answers if what you said happened is true. Why was she still here? She should still be here, not after what had happened. He knew she was here. She needed to escape before he came back for her. With so many of her White Fang brothers and sisters in custody, she knew he wouldn't be too far away. He would be back, and he would come for her. A shuddering breath drew sparkling golden eyes to a limp form into the room, to the other figure lying in the hospital bed, restlessly shifting. Her blonde hair was matted against her face as sweat drenched the bedding, a groan escaping her lips. Tremendous pain still must have coursed through her, and she knew it. The bow on her head curled as her golden gaze fell upon the right arm. Or where her right arm should have been. It was her fault. She would still have it if she weren't here, if she had left sooner. If she hadn't involved herself in their lives. Brought them into it. Yang. Her name left her lips before Blake bit her lip, tears glinting before another gasp escaped her partner's lips, and her eyes fluttered open. And she froze, words unable to come to her as lilac eyes scanned the room until they fell upon her. Fear filled every fiber of her being. What would she say? Would she hate her? Tell her she never wanted to see her again? She would blame her. Hey! A gentle whisper. Yang snapped Blake out of her depression and into her glinting lilac eyes. Are you okay? I don't remember anything that happened. I just remember that guy standing over you, and you were bleeding. Leaping across the room, Blake couldn't contain the sorrowful howls contained. She felt her rigidness as she buried her head into Yang's shoulder, but it only made her tighten her embrace on her. She didn't want to let her go. This was her fault. I am so sorry. Blake bawled, tears staining Yang's shoulder, knowing she was looking at her with confusion. I am sorry. I am sorry. I am sorry. Okay. Yang stuttered, struggling to comprehend Blake's reaction before she felt her arms wrap around her, attempting to comfort her by combing her. Then she felt her muscles taut and then shudder. Blake winced, knowing what it was she saw. It was inevitable. And Blake buried further into the nape of Yang's neck as the audible devastating shriek, and realization dawned on her where the pain radiated from her body. I am so sorry. This is my fault. This wasn't her room. Wasn't this JNPR's dorm? Why was she here? Wasn't she outside? The last thing she remembered was the overwhelming guilt of somehow bringing the legendary hero of the greatest legend from her mother's bedtime story to her world. And then that horrible dream with that woman tormenting and igniting her repeatedly. Her stomach lurched. She couldn't contain it. Quickly fumbling across the bed she knew wasn't hers, the contents of her stomach spilled onto the floor. She wished she could have made it to the bathroom. Ah, gross. Sorry, Nora, Ruby muttered, knowing her friend was there, and grimaced. I feel nauseous. I'll clean it up. No, don't worry about it. Not after what happened. Nora chirped, a broad smile on her face before a mysterious biohazard outfit was suddenly donned with a mop and bucket in hand. I am on the case. Where did that even come from? Ren questioned, tilting his head at his odd partner. Don'tcha wanna know? Nora beamed and began to clean up, singing a tune to her beat. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. Okay then, Ruby murmured, managing to push herself up to a seated position on the bed she was in, unable to process the scene before her. Why am I here? The last thing I remember. Hey, kiddo, a voice that she immediately recognized and snapped her head toward the origin. Uncle Kiro, why are you here? She loudly cried, attempting to leap off the bed and hug the man before clutching her stomach. Oh, no, no, no. Don't reject me again. Keeping an eye on you after everything that just happened, little Rose, Kiro nonchalantly responded, his arms crossed as he kept a firm eye on Ruby. A deep frown adorned on his face. Got some explaining to do. I am afraid, and your friends deserve to hear it too after seeing what happened. Hearing her uncle's words, Ruby's expression turned dejected. Looking down and away, she grimaced as she took it everyone had already knew. She was the reason he was here. I don't know. Ruby bit her lip, and her eyes glimmered. When we were on the tower, I felt something snap within me when I felt all was lost. I was so hopeless, weak, nothing, a failure that could never live up to what Mom was. At that moment, when I was at my lowest, and I managed to find something inside to make a move, Pyrrha said she saw a silver glow come from me. Kiro's eyes widened. What was Ruby admitting? The silver eyes activated. If they had already awoke, now with this development. If she found her, what, RWBY, that's not. Hiro tried to intervene but was interrupted by RWBY as their eyes met. And suddenly, he appeared before us, wrapped in the glow of that light that came from me, came from my eyes. RWBY's eyes shimmered. I don't understand it, but I know what I did. Moments before, I was thinking of the tale my mom used to read to Yang and me before bed, and I regained my courage. And with it, I summoned the hero of the Brothers of the Sun and Moon. Everything had fallen apart for that woman. Under any normal circumstances, she would be utterly thrilled. And at this moment, she couldn't care less. After all this time of being held under her boot, even if she may have enjoyed some of the sadistic things she was unleashed to do, she was free once more. Where was he? This was their meeting spot. She had been here so long. Everyone else had been rounded up, but he was too good to get captured. He always escaped. Always. But it had too long, and she was so alone here. Roman, where are you? I know the wind carried me away, but I waited for you here the moment I saw everything was turning so we could make our move, start anew like we did on that day. Three-tone hair fluttered with a windy breeze, heterochromatic eyes gazing upon the remnants of a torn-down building, a burned mansion. Her old home, Vani Estate. With that breeze, her eyes caught something drifting onto the rubble, something she hadn't noticed before. Her eyes shimmered. No, she slowly took several steps toward it. It couldn't be, it wasn't possible. He always escaped, and even when he didn't, a plan was set for his rescue. No, no, no. Tears welled in her eyes. This wasn't happening, this wasn't him. This broke his code. Above all else, this was his #1 motto. Survive. No. Falling onto her knees, she reached out to collect the object caught in the rubble of her parents' home. Was the one thing Roman would never leave behind. His bowler hat. Caressing it into her bosom, tears streamed freely, she knew. The man who saved her from her misery was gone. Lifting her head to the skies above, a muted scream echoed, warping and shattering the heavens like they were glass as the world bent around her. And still not a soul heard her agony. He was a what now? How was that even possible? Did that even make any sense? Did the girl's powers make any sense? Her uncle didn't seem to have any grasp on her ability. He had no idea the power that her eyes could do that. He was aware of several dojutsu like the Sharingan, Rinnegan, and Byakugan, and they all have various abilities. These silver eyes had strange powers if summoning someone from a supposed fictional world was possible. Despite the terror of thousands of possibilities, optimism remained. If he could come to this world through their power, he should be able to return home through their powers. At least in theory. Somehow, reverse engineering that process and teaching the girl how to process and utilize her powers. Along with adjusting to these new powers thrust upon her would be a trial. But Naruto was in this for the long haul, if he wanted to return to Konoha. What in the world is that? An overwhelming sensation washed over his senses, his eyes flickering wildly. Such vivid emotion, so raw and wild negativity, yet so pained and filled with sorrow. I know it's a lot to take in, believe me, I am trying to take this in, Hiro's voice echoed before catching the change of his posture and tenseness. Kid. What is it? I am heading out. Naruto, careful of his surroundings and not too accustomed to the area to use the body flicker safely, bolted out of the door. Whatever this is, it cannot be good. Nothing made sense. What was it he was witnessing? The skies warped and turned pink. The cumulus clouds changed color and became brown, forming and building into shapes he had never quite seen before but taking a horrifying shape nonetheless. His ship rocked back and forth despite being docked as thunderous roars echoed. It sounded like an actual thunderstorm, he mused. As if a storm was hurling around. Then, the scenery shattered like glass shatters, scattering in the wind with high velocity like tiny razor blades. He threw his head back in horror, knowing what came next. Brace for impact. They tore his ship, the ship he recovered, along with all the property he had obtained after that horrid hacking attempt that would stain his name for some time. They cut and gashed through the hull. He could only imagine what it was like outside to those unprotected, the people caught in this storm. Gnashing his teeth as holes tore through the airship, he painstakingly retook. He covered his face as a light flashed before his eyes, the sounds of objects pelleting and rupturing through his ship ceased. And the scenery reverted to normality. His expression was of disdain. This was not beyond his expertise, this was something otherworldly, divine almost. As if it was the will of a higher. Status and damage reports. Ironwood snapped at several soldiers and officers to claim and run this ship. I want everyone to be recalled and awakened immediately. All mechanics and data analysis to the CCT tower immediately. I need a transmission to Atlas Stat. I need our top researchers to uncover what we just witnessed. Of all things he had seen before, this was something to add to the list. Pink skies with brown clouds. Was that white lightning crackling within them after that thunderous boom? Didn't thunder come after the lighting? A flash of white lightning struck a tree nearby, splitting the tree into shards of glass. Okay, that's something to pair with this disaster of a day. Hiro bellowed, exiting the dormitories and witnessing the calamity befold. What is this? I was kind of hoping you could tell me. Naruto kept the intent focus on the strange inversion of the environment and what seemed to be a building storm, feeling the winds gain steam. This is all new to me, yet, funny enough, it's not the strangest event I've dealt with, but it's up there. This statement was lost on Kiro. He was intent on gathering information on this phenomenon, and as the wind picked up and the clouds built with thunderous booms and lightning strikes, that negative swell felt like an ocean, burying him. He wanted to locate it. If he could feel this sensation without using Kurama's chakra this far away, he knew something powerful was behind this, but with all the other emotions mixed with it, caused him great confusion. It felt like whatever it was happened to be suffering. Are you kidding me? What is happening now? Weiss' scream echoed, looking up the skies in utter frustration at the escalation of events. I've never seen anything like this. John echoed, unbelieving what he was seeing. This feels like something out of a fairy tale. Pyrrha nodded, a deep frown, clenching Milo tightly as an unnerving sensation settled over her. Drawing a koa from her back, she felt she made them at any moment. This did not feel natural. After what she experienced and saw, something coming out and attacking them was not beyond possibility. If fairy tales like the maidens were true, warriors from old stories could be summoned to reality. What else could happen? It's so pretty. Nora was awed at the scene before, frowning as the wind whipped around and the lightning struck. And so violent. Don't know if I want to be struck by that lightning, not sure what it would do to me. And it doesn't make any sense. I've never heard or read of anything like this before. Ren analyzed the scenery with a frown. Everyone, get back inside. Glinda ordered, wide-eyed at the scene and trying to retain order. This may turn at any moment. Did that tree turn into glass? RWBY brought notice to the tree Naruto had caught being vaporized into glass shards before frowning. Wait, that reminds me of something. I've seen something like this before. What? Everyone simultaneously turned to RWBY before Weiss gasped. That time we came to assist Blake after she infiltrated the White Fang. You're right. Girls, Hiro snarled, glaring between his niece and her teammate before taking a quick breath. We are out of the loop here, mind explaining? Nervously laughing, RWBY scratched her head while being the center of attention. With another massive gale and roar of thunder, their attention was drawn back to the peculiar storm. And Naruto's eyes flickered, sensing an energy swell within it, as it was ready to get down. What she saw, she couldn't imagine. That flash of light was blinding. She couldn't avoid it. She wanted to scratch her eyes out. RWBY had never experienced such an intense experience before. And the sound that went along with it. It sounded like the world shattered into glass around her before the raucous boom reverberated and coursed through her body and soul. It rocked so hard she fell on her butt. The wind made it hard to stand, but that shockwave finished her. Was this what it felt like when people got caught in her petal burst? And what was with that sound that was falling around them? Was that hail? Was it hailing? That's not good. They needed to get inside. Why was it pelting them? And why did it sound like that the hail was tearing through the concrete around them? Blinking repeatedly, rubbing her eyes so she could see, for all she could see was a brilliantly golden glow. RWBY was profusely confused. Why did her vision not change? It was a translucent gold. RWBY, you okay? She heard her uncle's voice right next to and above her before sighing in relief, looking above to see that Kiro was above and shielding her. One thing after another right now. I haven't drinking enough for this. Feel like I walked into a storybook and the ride won't end. I am okay. RWBY smiled before noticing his gaze was now fixated on something else. It was Naruto. He was in a similar golden state to what she was yesterday, but it was slightly different, and a strange-shaped glow glistened from him, his arms crossed as something wrapped around them, keeping them in a cocoon with what seemed to be long tails. Ah, cute fox. Nora's eyes glistened, attempting to pet the head, which was essentially patting Naruto. Insolent child. Do not pet the All Might. No. I said stop. What is wrong with this human? Does she not know fear? Boy, stop her. Your guess is as good as mine. Naruto nonchalantly shrugged as Kurama talked around him while he struggled to keep Nora from petting his ethereal face. A scowl adorned his face as he examined what was happening. Sorry for waking you. Needed your cooperation to make sure no one was caught in this. My repertoire of shielding jutsu is rather lacking, unfortunately. Pushing back Nora with a tail, he was able to free from the weakening hailstorm of glass as it faded, Kurama snarled. Not to mention the other things I can sense. Where are we, kid? What is this place? And why did reality shatter and rain glass? Think I need some explanations. RWBY's eyes widened at the sight before her. It was just like in the book. He had two souls within him. His and the demon fox that was sealed into him at birth. And now they were. He indeed was the same person. She had summoned the character from her book from his world. And all she felt horrible for taking him from his home. Everything was too much. Thunder roared. She held her face in the palm of her hands, her bow laid flat on her head, failing to hide what lay beneath. Those tears and wails chipped away at her sanity. It was her fault. She caused this, Yang would be. It's okay. A low, calming voice resonated before where she sat. I know it doesn't feel like it should be, but she'll be fine. She's tough, at the end of the day, with everything that happened. Blake tensed. Her muscles went rigid, her bow raised, and she gnashed her teeth. Who dared tell her how to feel? That Yang would be okay. How dare they? Who do you think you? Blake snapped, her eyes glistening with rage as she blistered, looking up and directly into vivid and shimmering blue eyes and a rugged, grizzled face. Blake recoiled, leaning back, her eyes glistened as her mouth opened, agape in horror at what she just said to whom she said it to. She knew who this man was. With his looks, it was undeniable. This was RWBY and Yang's father. She snapped at their father. And all he was trying to do was comfort her. She turned her gaze from him, a shameful blush adorning her face. She was the worst person imaginable. Blake did not deserve to be here. Around these people. They were too good for her. Yet all he did was sit beside her, letting out a soft sigh and a sad smile as the thunder continued to boom. Ha! I get it, it's all right. You've been through enough. An old man like me telling you everything will be okay right now is probably the last thing you need to hear, and you're right. Lifting her head ever so slightly after his admission, still not turning toward him, Blake's bow twitched. Why did this feel familiar? As if she was speaking too. Why did she feel she was at home again? Things aren't all right. The worst thing imaginable happened, and not everyone escaped unharmed. It's a miracle that things weren't as bad as they were. That golden kid really saved the day. Taiyang tilted his head before letting out another sigh. But we can't sit here and blame ourselves for what happened to us, to our friends, wallow in our misery. It's not going to get better if we don't take action. That's a lesson I had to learn the hard way. Still feel Kiro's boot. Biting her lip, her eyes glistening, she stayed silent as she listened to his words. Did he know what she was thinking about? Was it that obvious? How? Blake tried to change the conversation, her eyes shifting to the door of Yang's room. Do you think she will be okay? Fighting is. It will take some time. Tai's eyes glistened as he glanced over the door. This is going to be extremely frustrating for her. But that's nothing new for. She's overcome all the frustrations in her life, and they've become her fuel, her drive. Tell me, do you know what semblances truly are? Tai turned his gaze as Blake slowly lifted her head to meet his as he posed his question to her. Of course, they're the innate manifestation of one's soul brought forth by their strength of will. Blake responded with a textbook answer, pondering why he would ask such a question. Tai simply smiled, nodding. Good, then you should know why Yang will overcome this since Burn is Yang harnessing her frustration with this world and weaponizing it. She always takes hits in. A flash and ear-splitting roar tore through the hospital, shattering the windows. What sounded like bullets raining upon them tore through the walls. Reflexively, Blake tried to shield herself, but what she didn't expect was to be pulled down to the ground and protected by Yang's father. It was humiliating, yet he was far more experienced as he flipped the seats in front of them to give as much shielding in front of them as possible. With the wall and the chairs, it seemed more than enough as whatever was piercing through wasn't very stable and fracturing into the walls. But anything through the open windows was struck. Is that glass? Blake hissed, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the objecting pelting as they slowly faded and the rain was ending. What is going on here? I don't know. I've never seen anything like this. Tai scowled as the barrage ended, a deep frown, preparing to call a specific person to see if he was available for answers before his eyes widened. Yang. Without another word, the two sprinted into the room to find the bed had been flipped on its side. Yang was on the floor with a certain blonde faunus gently cradling the unconscious blonde, having been sedated to sleep. Okay, that was freaky. What was up with that? Blake sighed in relief while Tai let out a bated breath. Anytime she needed him. Sun was there. Naruto found the inside of the airship even more intriguing. In fact, it was amazing. So much technology. He wanted to tinker with it. Figure out what it did. After all, they invited him onto this ship, probably because they understood he would have followed anyway, and there was no way to stop him. The girl was his main priority. She was his ride home. He wasn't sure if he was a storytale character or drawn from another world, but it didn't matter. If her power could bring him here, it could take him back. Eventually. And given that he was in the thick of the issue, he wanted to hear this information. Anything that affected the girl was something that affected him. He didn't care if the ship's owner didn't trust him. It was relevant to him. Of course, his presence seemed to build the tension on the deck, but not as much as the two girl teammates. The glare they were getting from the general after being informed of everything, he didn't seem too thrilled. How many things happened in such a short amount of time? James laced his fingers together, a stern glint in his eyes as he glanced upon the young would-be huntresses. You girls are often at the center of such incidents. You are too reckless. It is quite clear that your team needs further evaluation as the consistent incidents should not be overlooked. Weiss withered at the man who was the general of the Atlas Army. If he told Winter anything, oh, she would never hear the end of it. Ruby shrunk, unable to meet his stare. His presence was overwhelming. The several times she had met him before, he had been relatively pleasant. Until after the incident with Yang in the Vital Tournament, then his trust. Enough, James. They were doing what they believed was the course of action like all huntsmen should. Hiro snarled, feeling slighted hearing Ruby be disciplined for things she already had gone through and had learned her lessons for. It was not their fault that taking those actions and investigating them drew them into danger that they couldn't comprehend. Back off. Turning his gaze onto his old friend, seeing his expression, Ironwood closed his eyes and took a moment to recollect his bearings. These incidents had left him withered, but Kiro was correct. They followed their hearts and made proper decisions on their paths of justice. It was simply unfortunate the path it led them on. However, the lack of oversight is something I cannot overlook. James scowled, his gaze turning from his friend and falling upon Glinda, who sharpened her gaze and crossed her arms over her bosom. How they were running wild without any restrictions is beyond acceptable, the damages that could have been done. Are you questioning how Ozpin and I run our school? Glinda snapped, displeased with his assertion. I will have you know. Hey, Naruto's resonating voice, snapping at them, drawing their attention and directing it toward him. Could you all stop your bickering for a moment? Your ceaseless power struggle, for whatever reason, isn't getting us anywhere. Let's calm this down and bring this to the matters at hand. Like the sky shattering in my quandary. Yeah, that's the right word. Okay. Making sure. To deal with, Naruto finished after a momentary pause as Kurama sighed within. The fox rolled his eyes and scoffed as his boy made his point, annoyed he had to help him. It took time for him to mature and grow, but the kid was finally putting time in to be well read. It was just years later than it should have been. If he only realized that was one of the requirements for the job he wanted in the first place, but alas, his boy was a late bloomer, better late than never. Perhaps he could find a tutor in this world until he could manage to make his return, maybe a cute one for some eye candy. Maybe even more, considering it would be even longer before he could tie the knot with Hinata, if at all. His boy did need the experience. If returning home was an option, Relaxing his stance and leaning, crossing his arms, a stoic scowl crossed Kiro's lips. Kid's right, we got bigger fish to fry, RWBY. With his gaze falling onto his niece, his eyes glinted. A lot of pressure is going to be placed on you, more than ever before. You better be ready, kiddo. The world is counting on you, and your friends are about to discover why. We're the protectors of Remnant. The attack on Beacon was only the start. I am afraid. Are we sure what happened? It can't be, it just can't. She's gone, and we must get out of here. Mercury gruffly whispered, running his hand through his silver hair, carefully glancing at the city's surroundings before prying open the door to a car. We have to be careful. With Cinder gone, they know we have connections with her, and now we're prime suspects in what happened here. Leaving Vale immediately is our top priority. Lowering her head, her eyes glistening at hearing Cinder was gone, Emerald was at a loss. Without her, what was she going to do? She had no direction, no aim. Yes, she knew Cinder wasn't a good person, but neither was she. She didn't care about other people. They didn't care about her. They left her on the street to be a beggar. A thief. So it didn't matter to her the damages she caused. She wanted them to suffer just like she did. But this did seem a little extreme. Mercury's voice echoed and brought Emerald out of her thoughts. Look, I know Cinder meant something to you more than just an employer. I don't judge, but if we stay here, we don't have a life left. Mind getting your head out of the clouds and helping? I got the car started. You can drive. You're a better driver and pilot anyways. Oh, yeah, I am on it. Emerald came to her senses as Mercury slid out of the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life, and held the door open for her. Hey, you are a leadfoot, so it isn't surprising I am the better. Get out of my way and get your ass in your seat. Gentlemanly doesn't befit you. There we go. That's the I know. Mercury grinned, clapping his hands together, hopping over the roof, and entering the passenger side. Let's get out of here. Mistral sounds good to me. The only place to go unless you want to live in the deserts of Vacuo. Emerald checked her gauges before grinning. Wonder how that would feel with your legs and all. Like hell, I'd be cooking there. Mercury blanched and shuddered. That heat would be the death of me. Don't even make me. Hello, my dear children, it seems, my dear maiden has fallen. A mellifluous woman's voice resounded behind them. I would like to have a word with you both. Yet despite how elegant the tone was, they found their spine shivering, their bodies froze as an uncontrollable terror welled within, a malicious intent hidden deep within the words they couldn't comprehend. But it was what she had said that truly terrified them. It was that she knew of Cinder, and claimed her as hers. And tentacles wrapped around their throats, dragging them both into the back seat of the car. This world was not like his. It was going to take him some time to comprehend it, and he needed to if he had to scour and find an opportunity to return home. So far, RWBY was his best course, but given the circumstances, that would be a long way away. And he would have to involve himself in a situation he was unprepared to handle. Well, I did say I wouldn't be bored, putting this one on me, Naruto muttered, hands in his pockets trailing behind RWBY, frowning at the damage as they walked through the hospital. RWBY looked highly nervous as she scurried ahead. He couldn't blame her, if her sister was here when that explosion happened and unconscious. Her partner looked equally unnerved. She seemed quiet, deep in thought. Perturbed. You doing all right? Naruto asked, noticing Weiss' demeanor. Weiss stumbled, glancing up at Naruto, startled at being addressed before flushing. Oh, I have a lot to think about, with everything that happened, and now hearing what has happened to RWBY and about this war. Our professors are involved with protecting Remnant. It is a lot to be asked to accept suddenly, and I don't know how to handle it. I know that feeling. Been there. Naruto held back a chuckle. A warm smile adorned his lips before he let it fade due to the atmosphere and feeling it was inappropriate. What am I saying? Weiss panicked, amusing Naruto as he noticed her flushing brightly and looking away. I am so sorry. You were dealing with such a worse situation. On top of our issues, you were brought to our world, and I don't even understand how. I never even heard of such a thing as silver eyes. Must be a rare trait then, Naruto mused, filling that thought for later before giving her a calming smile to soothe her. Nah, don't worry about it. I am built to handle this. Sure, I am worried about the possibilities. It terrifies me. But if I let that get me down, I ain't gonna get anywhere. I'll make my own luck and do everything I can in the meantime until I manage to return home. Can't imagine how they are handling it without me." Stopping in her tracks, tilting her head, a perplexed expression crossed Weiss' face. She stared at Naruto as if trying to decipher a code she couldn't crack. It was almost unnerving. He was going to say something if she kept staring. "How can you have such an optimistic outlook on your situation? When there is no..." Weiss' face darkened, and she flinched, afraid of the following response. Instead, Naruto beamed a chuckle following a scratch of his head. "It's just the way I am. Been told I've been too optimistic, but nah, that's not it. I can see the other outcomes. I just work my ass off to make sure they don't happen. Even when life was at its darkest for me, I always saw the light and believed. It nearly crushed me. I gotta admit, gotta say something if I am still standing, ya know." With shimmering eyes upon his words, icy cold eyes warmed, and understanding came over Weiss. A gentle smile graced her lips. "I see, I think I understand, thank you." "Don't mention it," Naruto grinned, using his sensei's patent eye smile. "Sometimes a fresh outlook is just what you need." Weiss nodded courteously, her gaze turned ahead, grimacing at what was to come. "Yes, shall we? I fear RWBY isn't the only one taking the situation very well. Get out of my room." I feared this was the case. Weiss hung her head pitifully, tears threatening to spill as they welled within her eyes before she gazed upon the figure huddled in a chair by herself. Blake curled into a seat, wrapping her arms around her legs, cheeks stained with dry tears. Weiss was at her side, arm wrapping around her shoulder. "Hey. It's my fault, it's my fault." "No, no, no." Weiss immediately backpedaled, eyes fearful of the reaction from her friend. "You couldn't have possibly known. He wouldn't have found me if I wasn't here, Weiss." Blake roared, slapping Weiss' arm away from her, eyes livid with hatred. "Yang would have been okay if I wasn't here. He wouldn't have been here." "What makes you think he wouldn't have been?" Blake scornfully gazed upon the intruder that came with Weiss. She recognized him and hissed. He was the reason she was still here. And now he was questioning her. How dare he? "What do you know?" Blake viciously spat, standing and squaring at Naruto, her golden eyes staring straight into his. "You know nothing about me or him. What he would be willing to do. Stay out of this." Keeping a calm and level gaze with hers as she snarled and spat in his face, Naruto took a deep breath to stay calm and control the situation. Being emotional would only hurt. This was something he had been practicing. He would thank Shikamaru if he could later. "You're right. I don't know you or him, whoever this him happens to be," Naruto responded without backing away or recoiling. "What I know is that things don't happen by coincidence. He wasn't here by chance, and what I can tell you, you might not have been as much of a factor in it as you want to believe." "He's right, Blake." Weiss tried to calm her friend, stepping beside her timidly. "As much as RWBY came by to see Yang, we came by as there was something we needed to say. So much has happened, and you won't believe it." "What are you talking about?" Blake snarled at Weiss before bringing her attention back to the offender before her. "What do you have to say that would even matter? My friend lost her arm for me. To protect me. Where are you going? Get back here. You aren't gonna listen in the state you are in, and she's in hysterics, so I am gonna do what I do best." Naruto's eyes darkened as his bangs covered his eyes, and do the impossible. "Don't go in there," Blake roared, seeing the door open, and chased after Naruto, Weiss' eyes widening and followed after. Upon entering the room, he saw RWBY and Taiyang attempting to calm their sister and daughter, respectively, and it was a miserable affair. They both looked rather rough. They turned to him, one confused, the other surprised. "Naruto, why are you here?" He didn't answer. He turned to fuming and fiery blonde, seeing her in her miserable, disheveled state. The dried tears staining her eyes screamed more than the savagery and volume of her voice. She was in tremendous agony. Her life in ruin. "Who the fuck are you?" Yang screamed and vividly glared into Naruto's eyes, enraged and belligerent. "Get the fuck out of. You still feel it's there, don't you?" Yang's words died on her tongue, and she shrunk back as her eyes locked with his cerulean gaze, but more importantly, the bandages falling off his right as he tugged and pulled them off. Her eyes widened, seeing the clear distinction between the skin of his arm. His arm was surgically grafted. Naruto descended toward her as the room quieted, gently placing his prosthetic arm on her right shoulder as his eyes shifted to Orange. "Allow me, someone that knows that pain all too well." Yang gasped as an energy coursed through her. It traveled down her arm, and she wanted to scream in agony, but the feeling, like he said, it was there, it was still there. But now, her eyes widened. Yang put her right hand before her face, trembling at the sight before her. Her arm, her fingers wiggled at her movements. Tears spilled from her lilac eyes at the sight. Feeling a hand lifted from her shoulder, her head snapped up, and looked directly into Naruto's eyes. And without hesitation, she leapt from the bed and wrapped him into her embrace, her cries echoing throughout the room. "Thank you, thank you." Naruto simply closed his eyes, letting out a content sigh. If only he could do more things like this more often. So this place was a school, a combat school, but a school nonetheless. It made sense now that he gleaned some information about this place and these huntsmen and huntresses. It ran similarly to the academy, albeit he figured there was more to it, as he felt as if Ruby or her friends were anywhere near capable of holding their own against the woman that he had to take care of. That was more than combat ready. Perhaps they were ensuring they were mature and prepared to handle their duties before heading to the field. Now that he thought about that, it did sound solid. How many young shinobi were unprepared for the rigors of the ninja way? Perhaps a few extra years of seasoning and preparation combined with how they did things could work. He would have to see how they did things, but... Take this. Glinda extended a small object toward Naruto. "You're going to need it. It's a multi-purpose tool connected to the world's network for communication and information. Unfortunately, some of those functions are currently down, as this tower is the centerpiece of communication outside the kingdom. Local communication is still running despite the tower's condition." Accepting the scroll and examining it, Naruto expressed his curiosity. Cool, sounds like the cell phone technology we've been working on, but it looks far more sophisticated. Not surprised given what I've seen here." A sullen expression crossed his face. He could only hope there would be a method to return home. Glinda's shoulders depressed and grimaced. Her eyes glistened, the damaged office they were in reminding her who was missing before she took a deep breath to focus. It is also unfortunate that the former headmaster of this school fell in the attack. If there were someone who may be knowledgeable of bizarre circumstances such as one you find yourself in with young Rose, he would be the person. Alas, he isn't here now. Damn, that is regrettable. He passed away. Naruto flicked his hand through his hair and sighed. Any usual information is valuable, so at least this little tool is a start, but without any leads, it's gonna be rough trying to discover how to send me back. You misunderstand the situation. Glinda frowned before her gaze turned and looked out the window, looking upon Beacon and the world outside the office. He may have passed away, but Oz always returns. It's his curse. And that means someone that may understand this situation better than anyone else is out there somewhere. A fine mist filled the room. Water dripped from his form. Stepping over the porcelain tub, a hand grasping the towel from the trowel, a young man wiped the water off his body. Carrying a hearty whistle to his own tune, he dried off after a hard day's work. "Oscar." A woman's voice echoed from outside the door as he went to grab his clothes. "Dinner's ready." "Almost finished," Oscar called, wiping the mirror with a dazzling smile. "Just got to." "Hello there." "Oh dear." Oscar slipped due to the dampness and the sudden shock of the voice and what he saw in the mirror. Unfortunately, his head slapped to the hard floor, and his world darkened. And the voice defeatedly sighed. "My mistake. After thousands of years, you think we would have gotten better at this? This was too much too quickly. How was she supposed to handle all of this?" A sudden attack on Beacon by the White Fang and Grim. That was led by a shadow organization. Running into Adam. Yang protecting her and losing her arm. Pyrrha fighting the person that led the attack on top of the CCT tower over some mystical power after the woman received the power and killed Professor Ozpin. Ruby then discovers her eyes have mystical powers to not only instantly vaporize Grim but also summon fairy tales or people from another world. That said person goes save and protect everyone, defeat the woman behind Beacon's assault, and then regenerates Yang's arm. Oh, and now Ruby had that woman's power, as she apparently was the last woman she thought of, as that was how the power was transferred, for some reason. That wasn't mentioning the shattering of reality. Blake was having a mental meltdown, staring vacantly into the space of their dorm room that had recently caught fire due to Ruby being chosen. unable to comprehend the sheer volume of information dumped upon her. How was she supposed to handle this? Gracefully. Think we may have lost Blake. Yang shook her shoulder, trying to snap her out of her stupor, glancing around at their room. Gotta say, it is a hard story to swallow. Then again. Raising her right hand before her face, her eyes glistened before she clenched it in a tight fist, feeling the tension before releasing it. A small smile graced her lips. Gotta say it's hard to dispute it when the evidence is pretty. RWBY no fire. I wasn't trying. RWBY panicked, waving her hands frantically, putting a fire out as a spark in her eyes faded. Why did that happen? I was only happy because I saw you smiling after everything that has happened today. Her eyebrow twitched, and Weiss scowled as RWBY blew her hand. She studied her partner as her sister came to her aid, comforting her and pondering what she had said. Her eyes sharpened. No one told them how the powers of the maiden worked, and she found that reckless. With RWBY's current predicament, she figured they would have, but she thought so much was occurring that they didn't tell her due situation or they didn't know, and the only one that did perish. Weiss snarled. She hoped it wasn't that. If it were, RWBY would have to discover it on her own. From everything she was learning about her partner, she was at a disadvantage as she already had an extraordinary power she didn't have any control over and no one to teach her about. And now she had another one to add to the list. RWBY, Weiss mused, calling her attention toward her. Just now, did you feel anything different right now? Like, was anything different when the flames generated in your hand? Huh. RWBY tilted her head before concentrating on her hand. Before she looked up at her sister with a warm expression. Seeing you so happy and smiling after seeing how miserable you were made me feel warm and fuzzy. Seeing you so happy reminded me of when Mom read us stories when we were little. Hey, let me go. Oh, you, Yang exclaimed, clasping RWBY's cheeks and pinching them before bellowing laughter escaped her lips as RWBY pushed her back, flushed red from embarrassment. However, placing her hand on her hip, Yang frowned. But that is a problem. If you were summoning this new magical power with strong emotional outbursts, that's gonna be a problem. And didn't you summon the hunk with your eyes because of that, too? What in Ohm's name is happening with you, Rubes? Ducking her head, her shoulders slumping, RWBY bit her lip. I don't know, I really don't understand. I didn't know that Mom and I were so special, and to know we have powers that others didn't know about, I just... Hey, don't worry too much about it. Yang wrapped her arm around her sister's, nuzzling up against her. There was no way you could have known. There also had to be a reason Dad and Uncle Kiro didn't say anything about what they knew. So we'll have to trust them as you know they wouldn't put our safety and interest at risk without reason. Look how long it took me to convince Dad to get my motorcycle license and Bumblebee or to let you join Signal. Gazing up at her sister, a slim smile crossed her lips before she softly laughed. Yeah, they are a little overprotective. Now I am starting to see why. Well, with how crazy you two act normally as father and uncle, I would always be worried about you. How often have we gotten into serious trouble because of you two? Weiss scoffed, earning a glare from the sisters before RWBY flushed in embarrassment and Yang sheepishly scratched the back of her head. Well, we just have to deal with this newest situation and our new guest and figure everything out. It will take some. Blake, are you okay? Blake. Weiss gently rubbed Blake's shoulder, noting her absent stare, and watched as Blake flopped on her bed, her eyes swirling in bewilderment. I think she's broken. How was he supposed to open this door? He was given this room but wasn't given a key. How was he supposed to get in when it was locked? He didn't want to break in. Sure, he could use his skills to get in without them, but that wasn't the point. Was this scroll the key? How did he use it? Was there some function that he needed to use? Hey, Naruto heard a familiar voice, turning to see a blonde bombshell in an orange tank top and black shorts exiting their dorm room, jacket in hand. Wait, did they give you a room here? Awesome, you're one of our neighbors now. For the time being, Naruto scratched his head, snapping his eyes back at the scantily clad blonde as she walked up to him with a large grin, hand on her hip. Your professor was quite accommodating with my circumstances, I guess due to my situation with your sister. Oh, did she explain that to you about that yet? Yeah, just did. Can hardly believe half of what I heard, it is so much. Yang exclaimed before shrinking with a grimace. I was leaving to get some fresh air and sort out my thoughts. After everything, I just need a ride. Need a what now? Naruto stumbled with wide eyes. Her terminology confused and alarmed him. What was she looking for? She was out looking to do what? I said I was heading out for a ride. Yang blinked, curious as to why he reacted the way he did, and shook her keys as it was apparent. Anytime I need to think about something, I always take a ride on my motorcycle. It clears my head anytime I ride. It just feels so liberating. Oh, that's what you meant. Naruto exhaled, ignoring the snort from within, before chuckling. Ah, that makes sense. Everyone has their own way of coping. Gotta find a place that sells ramen. I know a place. I can take you to it. Yang proclaimed, beaming at seeing the genuine excitement igniting within his eyes. Oh, they're probably closed now since it is so late. I can show the place to you tomorrow, though. Call it a date, then. Naruto widely grinned, his eyes glinting in pure elation. After this day's event, I need ramen. Yes, Yang brimmed upon hearing his response, filled with energy and cocking her fist back. Hearing that he was willing to go out on the town with her. She wanted nothing more than that. To get to know him more after what he did for her. Oh, tomorrow's gonna be fun. Yang gleamed before her lips puckered, a thought crossing her mind. Are you having trouble getting inside your room? Ah, what makes you say that? Naruto's eyes shifted, glancing at his door briefly as he tried to hide a grimace. Well, you are standing out here looking confused. Yang scowled, reaching out and snatching his scroll out of his hand. Not to mention you probably don't know how technology works, so here, let me show you. His eyebrow twitched, watching as Yang swiped his scroll in front of the strange device in front of the door of the room number Glinda gave to him. Naruto twitched, the door clicked, and Yang grinned as she turned the knob, and the room opened. It was simple. His fury knew no bounds. Are you serious? It's also my key. Naruto blurted out, frustrated as Yang gleamed, handing him his scroll back. She only laughed, not that she could blame him. However, seeing him sulk, she felt sheepish and hung her head, just how hard it would be to be in another world. Coming up with a plan, she clasped her hands together as her eyes gleamed. She didn't want him to feel too homesick, so she would do whatever it would take. She would make sure tomorrow. Hi Naruto. Guess we're neighbors now. Never mind. That would put a wrench into all her plans, the one thing that messed up almost all of her plans despite her love for her. Her dearest sister. A bow twitched. Golden eyes gleamed behind a cracked door. Worry filled her when she saw Yang take her leave. She agreed and wanted some time to absorb and decipher everything, with everything that happened. She didn't want to leave her alone, but with the way Weiss kept her eyes on her and RWBY trusting her sister. It felt like her friend didn't trust her. She couldn't blame her. It was a betrayal of their trust when she disappeared. But what was this? She went outside to randomly discover him. Right outside their door. Why was he out there? Sure, RWBY was the person that summoned him, and if there were a way to send him back, it would be through her. But why was he? Oh, he was given a room beside them. Why was he given a room besides them? Blake, what are you doing? Weiss called out to her, making her go rigid and slammed the door shut, turning around to see Weiss in her nightgown glaring at her with her arms crossed over her chest. Why are you sneaking about and acting suspicious? Blanching at Weiss' accusation didn't help matters, it only made her scowl and apprehensive of her motives. Biting her lips, she glanced away. Weiss, we need to talk. Weiss exhaled, closing her eyes before taking a deep, calming breath. Opening her icy blue eyes, she gazed upon her friend's timid figure. She knew something was wrong with her friend. She had been acting so strange these last few months, and it was amplified during the Vital Festival, learning a little about her after the incident with Yang and Mercury. She seemed terrified about something, and it worried her. Look, I know something is bothering you. With what happened, I think we're all terrified. Weiss, golden eyes glinted before they closed. It's more than that. I am afraid. It's that my past has come back to haunt me. I can't get away from it. Tensing momentarily, Weiss' expression softened. That was a feeling she knew all too well. Her eyes widened when Blake continued. Yang lost her arm because of me, because someone found me and attempted to take me back to the White Fang. Blake opened and looked upon a horrified Weiss. No, not someone. A person who was so precious to me. A teacher that I thought I could trust, and placed all my faith into, and my heart. And I am so afraid he'll keep coming and hurting all my friends if I stay. A deafening silence followed her words. Blake didn't need to hear the following reaction, turning from Weiss, ready to exit the room and leave regardless of what she would say. She knew all too well what it would be. It would either be sympathy or anger, a mixture of both. Neither of those was what she was looking for, what she wanted. Even with Yang's being restored, she felt guilty for what happened. It didn't resolve her for what happened. She needed to absolve herself. And finish this once and for all. You think you can just escape your past? Blake hissed, snapping around. She looked down into cold blue eyes. What did she? Your past isn't the only one that haunts them, Weiss retorted, drenched with venom. Do you know who you are talking to? What my family's past is. You, of all people, should. Blake's expression fell. She knew all too well what her family's recent history was, how it intersected with her. Don't you think for a second I am not aware of the past coming back to haunt you? Weiss snarled, her gaze frigid as a glacier. How many people look upon me with trepidation? See me as only my family name. And as you know, I know all too the feeling when you are the target of hatred and being targeted feels like, so don't think you are alone in this, understand? I know, Blake snapped, startling Weiss before recoiling. I know that, but after seeing him again and seeing what he was willing to do to hurt me, and to cause harm to my friends. Blake, Weiss interrupted Blake, recovering gracefully, her gaze piercing into Blake's golden gaze. Do you remember what I told you when all of this began at the beginning of the school year? Blake's eyes shimmered, hanging her head. She simply nodded. Then stop running and come to us for help. We are here for one another. Weiss scowled, and her eyes shone in frustration. Trust us, Blake, as a team, we will help you, just as we will help RWBY with this. We will sort all of this out, okay? Blake stuttered, the bow on her head fully depressed as her head hung lowly, but I do trust all of you. I am just scared. It's okay to be scared. Weiss gently wrapped her arm around Blake's shoulder to comfort her. But we're here for each other, so if you need anything, just talk, alright? Blake simply nodded. Words failed her. Oh, how she hated this. She just wanted to smother herself with her pillow. I really needed that shower. RWBY yawned, the door to the bathroom opening, their team leader walking through, arms stretching up as she walked through before she noticed Blake and Weiss at the door. What's going on? Did I miss something? Weiss waved her off, a light giggle. Tell you about it later, you need to rest. We've got a new neighbor, Blake sighed, tilting her head toward the door as she shed Weiss' embrace. Just got room next to ours. Opening the door ever so slightly, Weiss' eyes widened at seeing how outside. Professor Goodwich put him next door to us. Oh, what am I going to do? If he's next door? Weiss. RWBY frowned at her friend's reaction, walking over to the door to see who Weiss was talking to before her eyes gleamed. Slamming open her door and heading out with a wide grin, RWBY led the charge, with Weiss stumbling after her. Hi, Naruto. Guess we're neighbors now. Blake blinked at the scene, mouth slightly agape. Releasing a sigh, she palmed her face and followed her team out the door. She knew he was gonna be a problem. So that's what happened. My dear children, did you think I would blame you for this? No, you would never have known something to this extent would occur. This failure belongs to no one. But now you work directly under me, and I require information. Go back in and get it for me. Succeed, and I can offer you the world. Fail. Well, I can only be kind for so long, so please don't fail me too often. My patience is running out. And you don't want my patience to wear thin. Emerald shivered, glancing into her partner's nervous eyes, seeing Mercury's gulp. Their plan was set. If they were going to get any information for their new mistress to keep her pleased, they had to start somewhere. And they would need to start with the most obvious suspect first. The invincible girl. Why did the sky look so different from usual? The dirt and ground was soft yet rigid. There didn't seem to be any rocks or rubble beneath her. Curious. The grass swayed and tickled, yet felt cutting. Tree branches of trees she had never seen rocked, and strange leaves fluttered and swayed in the wind. The same wind gently ruffled tailored clothing. Carrying a special item that belonged to him just beyond her grasp. That she was too feeble to grasp for. No. Why was life so cruel? Why did it have to take everything from her? Take what little happiness she ever received. Couldn't she have peace for once in her life? Be given that freedom that was denied from her for so long and that she lusted for. Live with the man who granted her freedom from the chains that bound her. Why did he have to be taken away from her? She would have sacrificed anything else. Given up her life if she had to. He was her everything. Why should she go on without him? Hi there. A mischievous voice purred. A heavy weight pressed upon her chest and made it difficult to breathe. Looks like you've seen better days. She rolled her eyes in annoyance. Life didn't stop, did it? It continued to pelt her with its cruel irony. Make her know just how low she had sunk. You might want to move, the voice thrummed, several small taps poking playfully into her bosom. I must warn you that the foliage here is quite volatile. What? Plant life. Volatile. Looking down at the pressure on her chest, heterochromatic eyes stared in confusion, locked in with blue eyes with dilated yellow iris. Was a talking purple cat kneading her bosom and gazing curiously upon her. Wait, why could it talk? Hold on, that sounded awfully like a book she read. Something tight wrapped around her waist, arms, and legs, poking and tearing into her with its grasp. The cat, with expert reflex, leapt from her in the instant she was violently yanked into the air. Vines, ripping and tearing into her flesh, through her clothes, wrapping around her throat tightly, she elicited a silent gasp as the spines dug into her flesh. Her aura should have been protecting her. But it was spent, and she was exhausted. Giving her soul, weeping for what was lost. She couldn't muster the resistance to fight this strangling her, tearing into and pulling her apart. She knew she should be able to overpower it. But her strength sapped, gone. Just like he was. Oh dear, the voice of the cat sounded almost pedantic about what was occurring before it, watching the incident inquisitively, almost seeming amused. I did warn you, my dear. Oh, will I witness an ascension today? How perfect. What was the dumb cat even talking about? It didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Limply lapsing in the hold of the vines, providing no resistance, her eyes closed as she felt the cold embrace of darkness slowly enclosing her being. The faintest of smiles graced her lips. Now she could be reunited. I'll do what I do best. A drowning sorrow filled her, tears welled in her eyes. That voice, no, Roman, she knew that voice. It was his voice. Oh, how she wished to hear it one more time. And now. Lie, cheat, steal, and survive. Her eyes widened. Those words, those were his way of life, above all else. And now no, she snarled. He was taken from her. Taken before his time. By her. If she hadn't come into their lives and disrupted their lives. Made out like bandits as King and Queen Vale's underground. Settled down once they fulfilled their wildest desires. Maybe have a daughter of her own and give her the life she never got to experience. The happiness of being cared for and loved by a father and mother without any strings attached. Not being their supposed heiress or the perfect assassin. If it wasn't for her, he would still be here with him. He would have never run into that girl. The girl of roses. Her eyes snapped open, burning with raw hatred. Her aura crackled around her. An unyielding rage coursed through her veins, mixed with the sorrow. Her body shook as it tensed against the vines, buckling against her straining muscles. The thorns pushed back against her regenerating flesh. Eyes shimmered, and raw passion glinted within. And a muted scream left her lips. The vines shattering, as the world shifted and warped around Neo's feet as she gently stepped onto the blades of grass. Her gaze fell upon the stunned cat looking upon her. Oh, you are like them, aren't you? How interesting. It was strange. He thought he could seek out that malice he had sensed. With all his clones surveying the area, he could help those in need and gather information in one fell swoop, but there was nothing to collect. Nothing that helped him with this situation on his own. He bit back a curse. Such strong negative emotion, it was unsettling. He had sensed it without wielding Kurama's chakra, and he could only feel the faintest hints of negative emotions when nearby someone. Yet he felt like an ocean swallowed him, and he couldn't locate the origin point. He did not like this. It was as if it was the source of emotion. Vanished. Orange eyes narrowed as he looked upon the carnage of what had occurred in the streets. So much damage caused by a single casualty shift. He gritted his teeth, pondering what could have caused such an event. Narrowing down those possibilities. And he didn't like the conclusions he came to. Kid, the surprised and muffled voice of who he was searching for echoed, landing gracefully in a crouch before standing before him. Naruto looked bemused, seeing him choke and spit the alcohol he was sipping from his flask. His presence seemed to catch him unaware, which most likely annoyed him. A trained soldier never liked being caught off guard. Hiro snarled, putting his flash away and wiping his lips. Thought you went back with Glinda while we handled taking care of the situation here. The Grimm have been annoyingly numerous and keep being drawn to the city. His copies are in the city assisting the civilians and surveying the damages. A second voice drew their attention as the rubble of the damaged buildings began to repair itself. If James could only set aside his paranoia, there is too much that needs to be done and not enough able bodies to assist. And you don't need to run yourself ragged either, Hiro declared, noticing the stress lines under Glinda's eyes, the sweat drenching her clothes, and her frazzled hair. You can't fix everything in a day. It's not possible, and I won't let you do it. We can't rush the kids either, for most of them aren't ready for this, and they did well enough to handle the first wave. I might be able to assist with that, Naruto interrupted, a pensive expression crossing his face as he gazed upon Glinda. I've been doing what I can with the people and providing enough able bodies, but fixing the damages to existing structures is far beyond my abilities. That said, I can provide you with the necessary energy and stamina to help rapidly speed up the process if your body allows you to use it. Snapping her attention sharply to Naruto, a scowl deeply adorned on her lips, Glinda adjusted her glasses. I understand your aura, or chakra as you've called it, doesn't sound fundamentally different, but would that work? Even if it is compatible, aura infusion, while sustainable for strengthening and enhancing another's aura, even replenishing it, there is so much that needs to be done. Consider me a battery, Naruto smirked, his eyes glinting. I have more than enough chakra, you can believe that. I sustained, and I fed an army with my chakra to protect and fuel their reserves in the middle of a war.
My chakra, that's not the point. Naruto fumed at Kurama internally, not wanting to debate with the Nine Tails on semantics. He could give his chakra and do the same. His reserves were more than large enough for most normal individuals. Kurama's were so vastly enormous in comparison it was like comparing a lake to a sea.
Is that so? Glinda drew his attention from his internal conflict and into her resolved gaze. Very well, I am well aware there are risks. Our auras may not be compatible, and something may if it were to speed up Vale's recovery. Seriously, Hiro intervened, interjecting at what he was hearing, and stepped in. This is completely reckless. Shouldn't you at least take a moment and... I should be able to minimize any adverse effects if any occur, Naruto responded, feeling Hiro's concern and wanting to alleviate it. I can recall my chakra immediately, and with my yin-yang release, I am able to restore vitality. I am still learning the limits as I can not only restore flesh and bone like an arm. As Hiro went rigid at the mention of an arm being regenerated, having a detailed conversation over his scroll from a hysteric tie about what happened to Yang, Naruto lifted his rebandaged right hand and examined it. And I can't help but feel my limits are somehow greater than before, for I could do something I couldn't do before when I couldn't save someone when they were being reduced to ashes. His eyes were drawn to Glinda as she stepped toward him, eyes held firm, and that is why I am willing to trust you. I've already seen what I need to know to believe and trust you. Hearing Pyrrha's tale of what happened, seeing Yang return to Beacon with her arm, I know enough of the fairy tale you come from to know that you make the impossibilities a reality, and I am willing to put my faith in what I've seen so far. Seeing the determined glint in Glinda's eyes, Naruto's gaze shifted to Hiro, seeing no further resistance, as he only crossed his arms and scowled. Naruto returned his gaze to Glinda. He nodded and confidently grinned as he outstretched his hand toward her. All right, if you are ready, just give me your hand, I'll handle the rest. Following his instructions, Glinda extended her hand and placed her palm against his, unsure what to expect. Seeing his transformation into the golden form she had seen when he assisted in saving Beacon and Vale, she resisted the instinctive urge to pull away. But then there was a sudden trickle of something foreign pressing into her being. An overwhelming weight, an intense and unyielding presence blended with aura yet buried it under its pressure. It burned with such intensity. It shocked and rattled her muscles. Yet a calming presence followed, calming the decisive surge, and her eyes widened as a red cloak of strange aura surrounded her, sparking and flickering with raw, unadulterated power. This is... Her body trembled under the pressure of the cloak before looking directly into Naruto's eyes. Only a fraction of your aura. How? This amount of aura is unheard of. and it is a fraction of yours. Yeah, Naruto nervously grinned, ignoring the mine echoing from within from an annoyed fox. As I said, along with my bud, I am an almost unlimited battery for chakra, and it would take something monumental for me to run out, but, for now, let's just make sure you can handle the chakra and be able to put it to good use. A long yawn escaped his mouth, and he sat up on his bed as the morning light hit him. It had been a long night, and to his displeasure, his internal clock kicked in. He wasn't going to get very much rest today. At least they repaired most of the city last night. That was a net positive. Glinda was able to put his chakra to good use. However, there was a downside effect. It seemed chakra burned through their systems faster and exhausted her. She could barely stand after taking care of many of the repairs through the city. And it seemed, despite his misgivings of him, the man of iron assisted Glinda and begrudgingly thanked him for his assistance. Naruto couldn't blame him. He wouldn't be sure he could entirely trust someone who randomly appeared in their world at face value. Ma, there is still too much about this world I don't understand. Naruto slicked his hand through his hair, looking out the window of the quarters he was given and seeing the sunrise. Sighing, closing his eyes, and taking a deep breath, he shook his head, his eyes focused on the horizon as if searching for something beyond what he could see. Here I am, trying to solve problems unrelated to mine when I should be focusing on finding a way home, if there is even a way home. It's who you are, kid, it's who you always have been. A familiar gruff voice echoed within him. You have always had a soft spot for doing the right thing. When you see something amiss or something wrong, you have that innate nature within you to help everyone possible. You hardly think about the consequences until later. Naruto gave an exasperated chuckle, a solemn smile lightly gracing his expression. Guess you're right about that, but I do focus on my friends more than anything, and I can't help but wonder what they are thinking right about now, how Hinata is. Silence reigned. Cerulean eyes gleamed in the warmth of the sunlight, glinting off the horizon and peering into the distance, attempting to unravel the world's secrets with his gaze. Worried about all his friends. Kid, Kurama growled from within, breaking his thoughts of his home. We do not know how this will unfold or how they will handle it. Dwelling on such thoughts will only bring pain and sadness. Besides, they are tough, and we believe in them, correct? So come on, believe in them, and let's make our own luck and see what happens, shall we? Being momentarily taken aback by Kurama's words, Naruto was snapped out of his lull. Then, a sliver of a smile crept onto his lips as an honest chuckle escaped. Hee hee, using my logic against me, someone has been paying attention, you know. Shut up and stop mopping. Doesn't suit you. Kurama snarled before toothily grinning from within. Now, I do believe we have a date, no? With the voluptuous blonde with the nice set as big as your future. Gah, Naruto sputtered, not prepared for what the Nine Tails had begun to speak of and was unprepared before boisterously retorting, what is with everyone as of late? Why is everyone so fixated on wanting me to ensure Hinata is the one? Do we not seem happy? Why is this? Do not forget I am part of you. I know all your doubts and concerns, Kurama snidely commented and silenced Naruto, freezing him to the spot. Take my advice while we are here, enjoy yourself, put to rest that corner of your mind that keeps bothering you. Otherwise, it will gnaw at you forever, and you will wonder if you did the right thing later in life. Kurama sagely advised his vessel before a loud, bellowing yawn echoed and rattled Naruto. Now, if you wouldn't mind, I am still in need of some rest. If you need me or if, you know, a show is about to go down. Go to sleep, you perverted fox. Naruto roared at his inner demon, twitching wildly at the implication Kurama wanted to watch, his face flushed with embarrassment, knowing full well he couldn't hide that moment it did occur from him. The two were connected, and Kurama would get to see it. Kurama laughed triumphantly before it faded away, but as the Nine Tails voice drifted, a deep exhale escaped from Naruto. Running his hand through his hair, getting up to head to the bathroom, his eyes shimmered. If only it were that easy to silence those doubts. Maybe I should listen after all. A bow twitched. She tried to concentrate on reading, but she wasn't invested in it. There was far too much on her mind to fade into the luxuries she liked to lose herself in. And it didn't help that she could hear a low thrum coming from the bathroom. What was that sound? Wait, was that Yang humming? Blake narrowed her eyes. Putting down her book on her pillow, rolling off her stomach and sitting up on her bed, she tilted her head, hearing the sound. What was she doing? It was relatively early in the morning, and she was the last to take care of her cares, so that was usual, but to take this long and be this nosy. She knew she took a lot of pride in taking care of her hair, but what was she doing? Wait, her usual outfit was put aside, was she wearing something different? A scowl adorned her face, scanning between the bathroom door and the clothes Yang left out, having decided not to bring in with her. What was she getting dressed for? She had several amazing outfits and a good sense of fashion, but what reason did she have to dress up? She knew they would be put to work while staying here at Beacon. That was sent through on their scrolls. Students were evacuated and allowed to relocate to other academies to continue learning while Beacon was repaired. They, however, their focus was going to be helping RWBY with her powers. And him. Golden eyes narrowed. Wait a minute. She shifted her attention to RWBY, who seemed to be gathering things together. Was that her motorcycle helmet? Why did she need that? Where was she going? Wait. It seemed she wasn't the only one that caught this discrepancy. Weiss scowled and noticed what RWBY was doing, too. RWBY, what are you doing? RWBY nervously chuckled, earning her an icy stare from her partner. Oh, nothing, just gonna go with Yang. What do you mean, go with Yang? Weiss coldly responded, having noticed Yang's peculiar routine this morning but thought nothing of it given everything. Where is Yang heading? Shouldn't we focus on the more immediate issues we must deal with? Like your new powers and our neighbor trying to find his way home. Oh, yeah, aha. RWBY anxiously scratched the back of her head. Well, you see, I heard this morning that Yang planned to show Naruto around town. And you're going to intrude on them. Weiss all but screeched at RWBY, causing RWBY to shrink and Blake's bow to flatten on her head in pain. RWBY, that is so. Yo, keep it down. Yang exited the bathroom, eye blush and makeup in hand, looking annoyed, dressed in a collared cream vest, a blackish-gray shrug, a black mini skirt, and thigh-high leggings. Whatever it is, I'll break it up and make you talk it out. I'll tie you all up if I need to. It's nothing. RWBY just said something dumb, and I snapped at her. Weiss turned, snagging the helmet from RWBY's hands and smiling brightly at Yang. Oh, you are looking breathtaking this morning. Are you perhaps heading out today? Okay. Yang frowned before puckering her lips, watching Weiss and RWBY fumble around before her. Thanks, and yeah, I am. I made plans for today. Golden eyes slitted further. A bow twitched. She was going to go with him this morning. She had made plans with him before RWBY interrupted them in the hallway. That was what happened when she ran into him. A cross crossed her mind as her eyes shifted to RWBY and Weiss, then to Yang. A devious smile crept onto her lips. That would work. Mind if we join you? Yang whirled in her direction, lilac eyes wide and flickered. I am not doing anything you'd. I want to join too. Yang hopped onto one leg as RWBY bounced toward her eagerly. I heard you were taking Naruto on the town. I want to show him around and help him get comfortable. So let me come, please. Yang leaned away from her sister, her expression contorted into a grimace, looking into her sister's glimmering eyes. And she crumbled before the heart-filled eyes of her sister. She knew her weakness. Damn it. It wasn't fair. Well, I guess, if you really want to come, we're just going to go out for some ramen. It's not that big of a deal, Yang muttered and looked away as if she was pouting. And you were getting all dressed up for that? Blake scowled, feeling Yang wasn't letting on that she had something more planned. Then again, the last time she remembered her wearing that outfit, Yang had Neptune on the back of Bumblebee, so. Yes. RWBY pumped her fist into the air as Yang deflated and released a pitiful sigh, glancing at her sister dashing across the room and taking her helmet from Weiss. Oh. Maybe we could go out shopping too. I am not made of money, Rubes. I barely have enough to afford things for me. Yang flailed, flushing in annoyance, recognizing she still had her makeup in her hand. Whatever. As long as you pay for yourselves. I don't have the lean to pay for all of you. We don't get enough lean to cover each other's expenses. So don't you go overboard. Weiss can't bail you out this time. She's not wrong. Weiss scowled as RWBY shrunk and nervously chuckled, reminding her of her family issues, drawing her scroll from her pouch. Her eyes shimmered, then her expression fell, and her shoulders slumped. Biting her lip, she turned her attention back to her friends. This would not end well. The room overall was a nice little setup, he would admit. It was designed to house an entire unit, so it was spacious for him, which explained the multiple beds. He sighed as he flicked a towel through his locks, drying his hair. Today was going to be a day. His clones had gathered intelligence on the area, but he still did not know anything. There was still so much he needed to learn, and he wasn't getting anywhere with his clones scouting, so perhaps going out on the town with a guide wasn't the worst thing. And for some ramen, with a gorgeous girl, feels like I am being tempted here, Naruto muttered, turning to his clothes and groaning. Feels like I am probably gonna need some spare clothes while I am here. Don't think one outfit is gonna cut it. Wonder if I should ask how to make some money while I am here. Just have a feeling this stay is gonna be an extended one. While sliding on his black collared jacket, he heard a knock at his door. Expecting it, he zipped up his jacket and opened the door. To see a flushed Yang twitching in front of his door, head hung low. So, change of plans. We're coming too. Naruto blinked upon seeing the brilliant form of RWBY and her team behind an annoyed Yang. He was a little surprised at seeing them, yet her smile was so infectious. And he grinned back, feeling he had to match the energy, tilting his head. Don't worry about it. There's a few things I want to check out. Mind if we make a stop or two? Frowning as they entered the building he wanted to be taken to, Yang scowled. She really didn't like coming here. She only came here when she absolutely needed to study. Or find Blake. She often found her here. She spent way too much time here in that spot she secluded from everyone else. Where she then repurposed for board games with the rest of the team against Blake's wishes. It was a good spot for that, and she didn't like it at first. Until she began to dominate them at her own game. Yang was still annoyed by that. She despised losing. Seriously. Here, Yang complained, watching Naruto take an interest in this horrid place, the library. What are you looking for here? White's eyes snapped to Naruto as Yang looked utterly baffled, taking in his intrigue. She didn't take him as someone who would visit a library of all places, and his interest in the place. She wasn't the only one as Blake curiously glanced in his direction, pondering his intent, watching his movement, glancing at the indexes, attempting to find what he was searching for. This piqued her curiosity. She hadn't pegged him as someone who was well learned. Their eyes widened as a thought came to them after hearing Yang's comment. Information. Blake and Weiss spoke simultaneously, surprising RWBY and Yang and one another, glancing at each other momentarily before Weiss took over. You're searching for information on how and why you are here, looking for any scraps of info that would relate to that or the Silver Eyes. Naruto nodded, scanning the shelves with a befuddled, attempting to find what he was searching for. Yeah, I might not be a naturally good learner, but sometimes, you need to study and learn about your surroundings, so I want to learn everything I need to know about here. Oh, Yang's expression changed, realization dawning on her with a long, drawn breath. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah, if I were caught in another world, I would want to learn about it and find an escape. You're just realizing that. Weiss raised her eyebrow as Blake went through the library index and went to the shelf. Oh, I'll see if this library has a copy of the Brothers of Sun and Moon. I know the section where it would be. RWBY snapped and dashed into a petal of roses, heading deeper into the library as if she knew exactly where to run. Wait, why do you know that section? I can never get you to read when it matters. Weiss complained, stomping in irritation, eyes twitching at RWBY's disappearing act. Gah. You are so frustrating, RWBY. I am going to harness that energy and focus it one day. Good luck with that. Yang shrugged, walking over to Blake before placing an arm on her hip. What are you looking for? This, Blake stated, picking out a book, walking over to Naruto, and outstretching the book toward him. You'll find this useful. It's a history book of Remnant. It's rather general but for an overall view. It would give me a better understanding. Appreciate it. Naruto smiled at Blake as he took the book. It's nothing. When I realized what you were doing, it came to me. Blake's bow twitched much to Naruto's curiosity before she suddenly leapt back as he created a clone and handed him the book. What are you? Why is your duplicate taking the book and reading it? Naruto seemed confused at Blake's reaction, scrunching up his face before rolling his eyes, remembering the lack of understanding. Oh yeah, you wouldn't know. Shadow clones have limited memory retention, so as long as I don't overload them with information, they can give me feedback when they are finished. Are you kidding? Yang's eyes widened as Blake and Weiss looked flabbergasted before pumping her fists as she hunched over, her eyes gleaming. That sounds awesome. I could cram for so many exams with an ability like that. I wouldn't have to ever worry about tests again. Yeah, wished I knew about that particular ability earlier, too. Naruto scratched his head before sighing, but as I said, you can easily overwhelm yourself. Cases of frying your nerves and fainting aren't uncommon. Severe cases can even cause comas, so it can be hazardous, and why the technique was forbidden. You have to know how to use it, or be me and have ridiculous vitality so I could find the proper medium after several failed attempts. Yang flinched back, her expression turning into a grimace. Okay, never mind, I don't want an ability like that. You are insane, you know that. Weiss added, glancing at him with a newfound expression of dumbstruck awe. That level of commitment is. I've always had to give it my all to achieve anything in my life. Naruto's eyes glinted as memories came to him. It was a struggle for everything in my life, even friendship. So I go to extreme lengths for so many little things as I know how difficult it all was for me to obtain in the first place. So yeah, insane is probably the right word for most things I do. Silence befell the team. Blake's bow descended, her eyes glimmering before frowning and glancing away. Just hearing made her reminisce over memories. It seemed his life in his world may have been similar in some ways. Weiss timidly gazed downward, flushed, unsure of what to say or how to even respond. What she did know was, his life sounded so lonely, and she knew how it felt to be isolated despite living around others. Yang scowled, placing her hand on her hip. Now, she was even more upset and wanted to get out of here, wanting to enact her plan. Have a fun time. The issue was her friends. I found it. Ruby's cry echoed, presenting the book with a large grin, bolting in with rose petals scattered around her before looking befuddled. Here you, what did I miss? What's going on here? Just a sincere conversation, Naruto answered, accepting the book with a broad smirk. Gonna take the time to read this one myself, want to scan over and analyze this personally, but before that. I am hungry. I heard there was a ramen stand somewhere. He loathed this situation, but it wasn't like there was a choice. Gripping his throat, seeing those glimmering eyes through that abomination's projection, Mercury shuddered, that sultry voice. With such dread-filled authority, he knew that he couldn't refuse, that paralyzed and rooted him in place when she spoke. And she wasn't anywhere in the vicinity, yet he knew that with that grim, she could dispose of them with utmost ease. Her presence was unlike anything he ever felt before. Even Cinder, when she was at her most volatile, didn't hold a candle. Grimacing as he glanced around the dim warehouse, a wrench in hand as he worked on tuning his cybernetic legs, his gaze drifted to his partner, her meek form as she tapped her scroll, searching for any information she could. What exactly is the plan here? I am sure we're wanted criminals at this point. Doesn't seem like it. Emerald scanned through her scroll, her eyes fixated on her scroll as she thumbed through the information. It doesn't look like they have put a warrant out for either of us. I am not sure what they are playing at, but either they are keeping it close to the vest, or they don't know that we are involved somehow. Somehow doubt that after I intervened to keep the Rose girl from inferring with the broadcast that ended her little robot friend, maybe the idiot girl hasn't reported it yet, might want to silence her before she could rat us out. Mercury tapped the wrench against his leg, a sinister smile creeping upon his lips before he scoffed. But you would think, even if they thought that Cinder was working alone, they would want to speak with the team she was a part of. This is why we must be keenly aware of our situation and be careful. They might be onto us and not want us to know it, so it's best to be careful and not draw their attention with any dumb decision. They may have their hands full, but snuffing one of the core members' family might catch their attention. Idiot, Emerald snidely retorted, pocketing her scroll. But if the opportunity does arise, it might be necessary, but I prefer we keep this from getting any messier. I could infiltrate and get some information from them. If only someone else was here to do that job instead, Mercury spat, eyes glowing with annoyance, then we could do what we're better at. Well, they're not, and there's no use harping on the issue. They've both disappeared and who knows what happened to either. Emerald turned and began to walk away. Now, if you could hurry, we have a job to do. And I, for one, do not want to make this new arrival wait on us. Things were too quiet. Something was wrong, and he knew it. Everything had progressed too smoothly. The damages to the city had been reversed so quickly due to his help. In fact, everything had been so easily overcome due to his assistance. Even if Glinda was now exhausted and had slept most of the day away after the temporary infusion of his unique aura. But he felt it in the air. A sinister presence was stirring. If it was what he thought it was, this predicament would only worsen, and he feared for the residents here in Vale. He feared for the safety of both of his nieces, especially Ruby, after what had just happened to her. "So I see you are still amongst the leaving," a familiar voice echoed behind, narrowing crimson eyes as he knew who it belonged to all too well. If she was here, Raven, Hiro simply pulled out his flask and took a sip from it. He needed all the alcohol he could imbibe to deal with this encounter. After his swig, he turned and faced his dearest sister with a smug expression upon seeing her annoyance. Was she expecting him to offer a drink? Nah, he needed it. "So what do I owe the pleasure of being graced with your presence, sis?" Hiro scrutinized her appearance, feeling this wasn't a cordial appearance. Nothing ever was with her. Scowling, placing a hand on her hip, Raven scolded her brother. "HMPH, if I knew this was the reception I'd receive, I wouldn't have bothered coming to warn you and left you to your own devices. Shows how much you still care about your family." "Oh, a warning. Like when you warned Yang about Beacon burning while attempting to separate her from who she cares the most about in the world." Hiro retorted evenly, taking his sister's withering gaze without flinching. "I don't pick and choose when to protect my family, expecting something in return. I've always been protecting them and expect nothing in return, including you, sis. I know very well that Summer's child is dear to Yang. I know she would have never abandoned her. I said what was necessary to protect her and get her to treat her training seriously after losing to that woman, who now has broken reality and disappeared without a trace." Raven scowled, her gaze blistering as Hiro's eyes snapped to attention. "Wait, the young woman that Yang described in her report, is what caused the strange warp here in Vale?" Hiro questioned, bewildered by this development, before narrowing his gaze. "Raven, how do you know this unless you were keeping track of her?" "What makes you think I haven't? She would have killed my child if I hadn't intervened when I did," Raven flatly responded before smirking, noticing her brother's look. "Kept my eye on her as she was. Interesting, after all. Have to keep note of my enemies, especially when they find something noteworthy and they aren't aware of what they have found." Refraining from snarling, knowing his sister was stringing him along, Hiro kept from snapping at her. He just wanted her to get to the point. "Tell me, have you read the stories Through the Looking Glass and The Girl Who Fell Through the World?" Raven, seemingly aware of her brother's agitation, bored her gaze into his. "More fairy tales?" Hiro raised his eyebrow and scowled. "Are you telling me those stories have truth to them as well? Stories that even Oz himself had nothing to do with?" "Oh, they are more real than you would ever imagine, dear brother." Raven's eyes twinkled, and a wry smirk slithered on her lips. "What if I were to tell you a story about how I learned just how real they were? And why we have been using it to our advantage against her this entire time?" Hey, is that who I think it is? The brat and her team. Oh, I've been looking forward to." "Quiet." Emerald slapped her hand over Mercury's mouth, a frown crossing her lips, and watched them enter a small restaurant with someone she had never seen before. "Sorry, forgot." "Okay." Mercury scowled, annoyed at being reprimanded by his partner. "But we can't waste an opportunity like this. The brat and her team are here. Think of what we can learn or, at the very least, take care of." Tightening her expression, wanting to meet with their new boss as soon as possible, Emerald took a deep breath. Mercury had a valid point. Information was vital, as was cleaning up their mess if they could. And she covered their tracks. Emerald rolled her eyes, crossing her arms over her chest. "As coincidental as this may be, this is a fortuitous opportunity for us. Our contact can wait, especially if we give him some information, but let's be careful about this, understand? No taking unnecessary measures." A devious grin worked its way onto Mercury's lips, cranking and cracking his neck before popping his wrist. "Oh, I can get it if they have it. Now that I can fully cut loose, they won't know what, huh?" "I have to say," a voice echoed behind them, and their eyes shrunk in horror as they turned around and gazed into cerulean eyes. "You two radiate negative intentions. And I really want to have a night on the town without any issues, so I guess I'll take you in myself." The aroma of this place was divine. Not quite Ichiraku's, but nothing could ever match. The man and his daughter had a particular way about how they went about making ramen, and there was nothing else like it. Then there was the sublime taste that none could match. Perhaps it was bias, or that the place was a second home, where people cared for him even when no one else did. Not trying to ruin anything, but I sense negative intent just outside, seems directed toward the girls, might want to take care of it before it becomes anything. Naruto concealed a scowl, letting the fox chakra flow through him momentarily to confirm. He hid his discontent while his gaze fell upon the four. What could they have done to draw anyone's ire? They hardly seemed capable of earning such scorn considering how bubbly and upbeat. Two of them seemed. Blake and Weiss were a different story, but even they had a specific energy. Was it because of what he learned about RWBY? So soon. This would require investigation. Forming a hand seal under the table, he smiled as silver eyes beamed upon him. How do you like this place? Is it anything like it was back home? It seems pretty nice. Naruto returned her beam, taking a deep breath and inhaling the aroma before looking around. Nothing can replace Ichiraku's, but I am excited for some ramen. One miso and one pork over here to start me off. Never seen someone so excited for such a common food, Weiss muttered, brow furrowed, trying to understand his excitement before blanching at the amount he ordered. Sometimes, I will never understand. Everyone has their comforts. Blake shook her head before simply nodding at the server expectantly as their gaze met. Her order was wordlessly conveyed. Weiss scrunched her gaze at the scene before palming her face. Here, too. Does every place know your ordering habits? I am curious as to how they know. Yang puckered her lips as she stroked her chin before glancing at Blake's bow. Wonder if they know because of. No need to question it. Blake furiously flushed, not wanting attention drawn onto her, her eyes falling back onto Naruto as she searched for a distraction to turn their attention away from her. Her eyes flickered as a thought came to her, remembering the story he supposedly came from. If I remembered correctly, in the tale of the brothers of the sun and moon, something stuck out to me. It called you in your childhood a pariah, looked down upon by his village with no friends or family. Was that true? Blake. RWBY waved her hands, alarmed at the question as Yang choked on the drink she ordered while Weiss' eyes widened disproportionately. Naruto, however, responded with a light chuckle before exhaling with a small sad smile. Yeah, I was an outcast when I was younger. I struggled greatly in my childhood, and all of it was out of my control. I was an orphan with no friends for the longest time, just a lot of looks of hate as they ignored me, all because many people couldn't tell the difference between me and the fox when he wasn't even at fault for what happened. They didn't know that, but can't blame him for it either. Seriously, Yang scowled, her eyes flickering to crimson momentarily from agitation. People can be so damn cruel. If you only knew, Blake murmured at the shock her fellow team members were displaying, closing her eyes for a moment and taking a breath before gazing directly at Naruto. So another, if you wouldn't mind. How were you able to overcome years of such hardship? Naruto grinned at catching Blake by surprise as he caught where she was leading him as she nodded. The answer might not be as enlightening as you think. At the end of the day, I am just stubborn. What? Blake snapped, her eyes narrowed. Of all the answers she expected from someone who had faced difficult hardships, that was not what she thought she would have heard. It was almost insulting to hear. I just didn't want to let their hatred get to me, change who I was, ya know. Naruto continued in earnest, ruffling his hand through his locks before their gazes locked with one another. I was angry at them, for sure. Didn't understand anything, but all it made me want to do was prove them wrong, no matter the cost, show them up. And when I reached the end of my rope, I pranked the ever-living shit out of them to annoy them to make myself feel better. As his cerulean eyes peered deeply into her golden eyes, her breath hitched, those crystal swells. Was swallowing her whole. What was this feeling? A snort and then a loud laugh broke her from his gaze as her head snapped to Yang, covering her mouth. Oh, man. I would have loved to have seen some of those pranks. Sounds like they deserved them. Yeah, I can only imagine how cool some of them were. RWBY cheered, a wide grin spread across her face. Oh, Yang and I caused so many pranks. We can exchange stories. You know it. Yang elbowed Naruto in the ribs with a light tap, smirking as she did. Perhaps we can share some stories later, say, just the two of us. Yang, what? I want to hear them too. RWBY complained, pouting as Yang rolled her eyes while Naruto chuckled. RWBY completely missed that hint. Blake exhaled, running, and took a deep breath, glad she was saved from earlier. There was something about that look of his. But with what he said, Blake had a better understanding. It was something she felt and to be put into words, even so inelegantly. A light smile crossed her lips as she gazed back at Naruto. He was. Her eyes glistened as the bowls of food were brought to them. Her bowl of fish. Oh no, it's here. Weiss palmed her face before flinching, hearing a loud and enthusiastic yada from Naruto, and grimaced. Okay, I get comfort foods making you feel better and all, but isn't this a little much? You say that, but ramen means more to me. Naruto picked up the chopsticks offered, the wide grin on his face softening as he reminisced. When I was young, I stumbled onto a ramen stand. I expected, like many other places, that the owner would treat me with the same hateful gaze as everyone else, but to my surprise, he didn't. He served me up a bowl of ramen, told me it was on the house, saying it was just good business practice to help keep bringing in customers. Naruto longingly gazed into the ramen, ignorant that the gaze of the others was entirely on him. Hey, at a time when no one else treated me in such a manner, it was something else. I kept coming back, and man, that place became something special to me. Ramen meant something more to me. Eyes flickering at the story being told, turning her gaze and looking upon the bowl served to her, Weiss stared silently at the dish, shifting her gaze back at Naruto and then back at the dish. Memories of her past come to mind. And she closed her eyes, a soft smile gracing her lips. It's a wonder such a simple dish can evoke such vivid emotions. I know, right? Naruto broadly grinned and took a good whiff of the aroma. Ah, time to dig in. Itadakimasu. Curious eyes glistened as glass built around, taking shapes, forming into desired thoughts of the creator before shattering to her displeasure. Why couldn't she recreate what she craved for desperately? Why couldn't she draw upon that power? She destroyed the living vines and turned this entire area into a strange wonderland of her creation. What was this power? Where did it come from? And why did it resonate when she heard his voice? It perplexed and vexed her. She felt stronger. She didn't understand why. Or know where she was. Wherever this place happened to be, it wasn't Vale. She was sure of that. She last remembered being in the ruins at her family's home, and now she was at this fantastical, whimsical formation of land that this talking cat told her she forged from her will. How did she do such a thing? Why couldn't she do it again for what she desired? If she could create this landscape, could she create? She twitched as two curious eyes continued to gaze upon her unblinkingly. Why was the stupid cat watching her every move? It was frustrating. She wanted peace to herself to practice an attempt to draw forth the power she had felt surge through her. Try to craft the images in her mind. The former forest around her had not turned into a whimsical fairy tale land from all the stories she read as a child and still treasured to this day. She wasn't sure how she bent it to her will and changed it, but all the glass shards of her aura remained, and she could feel it came from her. So perhaps, maybe, she could recreate her Prince Charming if something like this was possible. If it was anything like she was younger and how her desire took its own construct from her semblance. It finally spoke, its gaze ever present as it watched her failed constructs shatter again as her aura pulsed around her. How peculiar, it seems you are incomplete, my dear, shall I say, broken. Now, how could such a tragedy such as this have come to be? Vibrant heterochromatic pink and brown eyes sharply aimed toward the strange cat, her lips twisted into a snarl as their eyes met. He dare call her broken. Yet, was the cat wrong? Without him, she had all but given up, and only his voice was what rose her to continue fighting again. Now, here she was, trying to recreate him with what she saw her powers do, but to no success. All because that woman sent him to his death, at the hands of that no-good little bitch. The curious cat didn't seem to take notice of the ire in her gaze or didn't care, she wasn't sure which. It only smirked as it finally rose from its position and sauntered toward her, his tail flicking behind him. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue, my dear. Neo rolled her eyes at the benign creature and its horrid pun and mouthed her discontent. She swore it was something that Blonde from that team would have come up with. She was a wizard with tortuous puns from the few times she had the pleasure of having to spy on them. how the Schnee or the Faunus dealt with her was beyond her. The cat was only amused, annoying her as he strolled past her and continued to walk by. Or perhaps it is that you cannot speak because you've always been broken, unable to be fixed no matter the means. Tensing as the cat stopped in its tracks, its head turning back to hers, its eyes peered through hers as if looking directly into her soul. I dare say whatever has broken you has led you to falling to this world. You are not the first, and oh, how I miss that dear child, but alas, it is no mistake, just like her, you are searching for something, and I can show you it. All you have to do is trust me. And then, I was like, swish, zoom. Then everything went kaboom and splattered onto the wall along with our opposition. RWBY excitedly recounted old stories with her exuberant energy to Naruto as Blake and Weiss blanched and deadpanned at her while Yang only chuckled, and that is how I toppled Nora as queen of the castle. A hill no one has toppled me off yet. Think I might after that explanation of how our second semester started. Weiss palmed and dragged her hand over her face while Blake sighed in exasperation. I'll follow your lead, Blake muttered, Bo depressed as she shook her head, a hesitant smile crossing her lips and seeing Weiss cover her giggle. Covering her mouth daintily as she muffled her laughter, Weiss' eyes sparkled momentarily. Alas, I do think we should give RWBY her hill. I think very soon she will be knocked down a few pegs whether she likes it or not. Bowing flattening as her gaze fell upon an enthusiastic RWBY, Blake's expression faded grimly, the realization of what was to come for her friend soon. The weight and pressure of being a leader of a huntress's squad was rough as it was something she was still coming to terms with, but now, to have the pressure of a secret society protecting the world from an unknown threat thrust on her shoulders because a power she never desired was thrust upon her. Being responsible for summoning a book character or offworlder to this world with the seemingly magical power of her eyes that she didn't know she had. And having to discover and fix that, too. Blake scowled, to have such a burden placed on her friend. If there was some way to help alleviate the burden. Her bow dipped further, her quivering. She almost abandoned RWBY to deal with this situation. What kind of friend would do that? She knew well RWBY wouldn't hesitate to do whatever she could to assist her in her troubles if she opened up. Neither would Yang or even Weiss, though she may have a few words to say about it after. Perhaps during. It was just so difficult. What is that at our dormitories? Yang squinted, placing her hand on her brow to help scan. Seems like there is a large gathering of some sort, and is that Professor Goodwitch out front? She looks pissed, wonder why. That's a lot of androids with her. Naruto scowled, his eyes focusing on the scene, eyes narrowed. She's talking to a prestigious-looking man. No, all attention diverted to Weiss. Her form went rigid, hand drawn and covering her mouth as she shivered. Eyes dazed and widened fearfully, taking a step back. No, no, no. I didn't believe his message, but he's here, why can't he leave me be? Weiss. RWBY worriedly spoke, reaching out to her friend, seeing her in obvious distress. What's wrong? What's the matter? I've never seen you like this before. Her words fell on deaf ears. Weiss was mortified at the sight before her visage sunk, her eyes misted as she bit her lip. It seems no matter what I do, I can't escape. Weiss meekly strode forward, resigned to her fate. This is to be my story, no matter what. Do you trust me? Weiss' head snapped up as she stopped in her tracks. Her icy blues gazed into dazzling ceruleans, a confident glint within as he held his hand outstretched toward her. What is this? A gentle voice hummed, gazing upon the whimsical scenery around bizarrely. Tracing her hands against what seemed to be a pink mansion, a woman with black hair with red highlighted tips tilted and frowned at all the glass shards spread throughout the area. This is quite unusual, none of this was here before. What could have caused this change? No, it can't be, could it? She frowned as everything around her slowly faded and shattered before her eyes as if it were only an illusionary construct. Her silver eyes shone brilliantly, recognizing the residue in the air. Has someone from Remnant fallen to the ever after? No, is it possible? The looking glass, not after all this time. A growl sundered the glass it shattered before her. A horrid humanoid creature with a horn mask stalked before her vision, carefully gazing upon her. She sighed, drawing a modified axe rifle hybrid from her back. Her cape billowed as white rose petals billowed as a gentle breeze blew. Her eyes fixated on the creature as a silver and red majestic glow emanated from her eyes. So, it is, the cat is involved. I see, I fear what is to come of this. Raven, I hope things are proceeding well on your side. Holy crap, who the hell are you? A young man with silver hair screamed, haphazardly hopping on a single leg, cradling his other broken leg to his sternum. His seething gaze then turned on a spiky-haired blonde who stood before him, tilting his head at him owlishly, looking amused at the sight. He wished this fight had been going better, but his partner's blades were snapped in half in a matter of seconds in their first assault when he snuck up behind them. This guy then proceeded to knock them around the street for the better part of a short scrum to the common eye. To them, they took several strikes that bounced them across the street several times. His movements were so swift they were left unable to counter. He left them breathless as his strikes were so heavy it felt like boulders landing on their bodies, and their aura was already crackling from the blows, unable to handle the stress. And when he proceeded to mock them by asking them to explain why they held such intent, he finally gave them the first chance to strike. He took it, only for his leg to pay the price for it. No, better yet, what are you, and what are you made of? He barked before a metallic snap resounded through the street. Name is Uzumaki Naruto. The clone of Naruto wiped a smudge off his cheek, annoyed there was a boot print on his face, however outwardly giving the impression he was amused watching his silver-haired opponent reset what he assumed to be a prosthetic leg. It would typically be amusing if he hadn't landed a blow. Insignificant as it was, his jaw would have stung at most from the boot regardless, but that wasn't the problem. What mattered was that he had taken a moment to try and gather natural chakra. And there was something inherently wrong when he did. The clone felt there was something wrong with this area, the balance in this area was askew, and it took just a moment longer for him to draw the energy than it should have. It caused him to be struck. Was it because there was an issue with the city? Was that why it had such a foul stench here, and the air quality was horrible? Was there something overall wrong with the planet of Remnant in general? Answers were necessary, and this information would have to be noted and knowledge passed on. His eyes narrowed. A foggy haze clouded his mind. A foreign presence was entering his system. It felt like the strange energy everyone used here was similar to chakra but slightly different. That dark-skinned girl wasn't moving and making very deliberate eye contact, was she? Casting an illusion, feeling the pulse of Kurama's chakra through his system, he made eye contact with the ruby-eyed woman, tilting his head with a wide grin. I am made of tougher stuff than most, so if you would kindly stop resisting. Boss has things he wants, and he really wants to know why you were trying to ambush his friends, otherwise. I am going to have to get rough with ya. Trust me, ya don't want that. His voice lowered an octave, his face straightened, and his orange eyes gleamed with intent. The emerald-haired woman was left breathless with such pressure placed upon her, shuddering as their eyes made contact only to watch them shift to cerulean hues, yet the pressure somehow became more intense. He knew she was aware he broke her illusion. His message was delivered succinctly. This was not a fight. He would get what he wanted from them whether they wanted to give it or not. It was whether they gave it willingly. Her gaze hitched, her vision swirled around her. Was she being caught in an illusion? Did he have an ability to mimic others? No, this wasn't. This was aura, raw potent aura. It was an ocean, a crimson ocean, and she was drawn into it. How? Was it when she tried to catch and manipulate him with his semblance? Was that his? She needed to escape, but she was being swallowed by this crimson ocean. It was burning her with its blistering intensity. And what was this? A maw was forming, the maw of a fox, laughing maniacally at her. Emerald screamed in terror. Waves of the aura swallowed her, pulling her beneath the waves. Dragging her head beneath, a golden light dissipated the aura, sweeping it aside. She could finally breathe. But where was the fox? Where was? Emerald gasped, her eyes darting all around until they rested into a cerulean gaze, and to her horror, they shifted crimson. She recognized the message. And shuddered in horror. You seem to know already, so cut the shit. Mercury snapped at the clone of Naruto bitterly, gingerly planting his leg on the ground before venomously glaring at the blonde, glancing over at Emerald, and cursed. She was petrified to the spot. He had expected her to use her semblance so they could get away. This fight was already unwinnable, and they just needed to escape. However, if she was acting like. And with the message he gave, directed toward her. He was aware of her ability. He was somehow immune to it. Lovely. Their luck recently had been horrible. Cinder dying. Being captured and conscripted into that demon's services. Realizing they were already in her services. Now this. What else could go wrong? What? Emerald's voice trembled, looking unsure of herself as she glanced at the blonde ominously looming before them. Do you want to know? We're willing to negotiate, on some terms. Mercury hesitantly gazed at his partner, worried at what was happening. What are you doing? We're already in. I am more than aware. Emerald snapped, gnashing her teeth, focusing steadily on the clone. I never expected any of this when Cinder took me in. I followed her loyally, and now look at where we are. Okay, I see where you are going, and I can't say. Shut up and follow my lead. Emerald bitterly cut him off, causing Mercury to scowl as she stepped toward Naruto, holding her arms up, showing she had surrendered. We're turning ourselves in, and we'll tell you whatever you want. If you can guarantee us protection. Softly shaded blue eyes shimmered, staring intensely into the ocean of ceruleans. Trust. Such a strong word, one that should not be used in many circumstances where it is not applicable. How often have people had their feelings mildly stressed by another's actions and claimed to be hurt and betrayed? Then, to simply go on about their day forgiving the betrayer. She had been betrayed so many times. By that very man who had arrived here. By her mother, her brother, even her sister left her, although she didn't blame her. Weiss would have done the same. She did the exact moment she had the power to do so. She struggled to trust others. It took so long to trust her teammates. Yang was the first she trusted if she was truthful, loudmouth as she was honest, forthright, and could back up her cocky attitude. She could respect it as she knew what to expect. She was easier to deal with despite her abrasiveness. However, her and Blake's subtle jabs did seem to be taking root, and she was making changes. RWBY took a little longer, for she found her team leader incredibly annoying. She thought she was an idiot. It was why she called her adult. While she had long since proven that she wasn't, it took some effort to gain her trust after their horrible first meeting. She mainly had gotten the wrong impression. Although the sisters were dolts, they were geniuses in their own respects and by no means dumb. But they sure could be fools. And finally, there was Blake. It took forever for her to trust her, despite initially being the first to earn her trust. The moment she learned she was a faunus, she felt so betrayed. While she said all the right things to her to have her come back to the team, not have her run off with Sun, having a faunus on her team. After everything she had been through. Hurt so much, and while she understood so much more. The pain still existed, it was there. And the White Fang and the faunus were a root cause of it. But so was her father. Blake wasn't at fault for any of it, and while she hid who she was, it was for legitimate reasons. She couldn't blame her for them. Weiss was finally able to forgive her then. Just as Blake did not hold her responsible for her father's actions. Now, here was this new person that she only knew for a short period of time. Who helped save Beacon and Vale from disaster. Someone she only had a few conversations with, yet strangely left an imprint with each one. Witnessed the miracle he performed to heal Yang. He had already accidentally kept this team together several times since his arrival, whether he knew it or not. He was the reason Team RWBY was here together today, why they all got to enjoy a meal with him. Why Yang had been hitting on him all afternoon. Now, here he was, asking for her to trust in him. With her father looming just in the distance. Icy blue eyes glinted. Weiss swallowed deeply, accepting his hand. Yes. He could feel Weiss' tension as they made their way to the front of the dorm and toward the commotion. He could feel RWBY's apprehension, her silver eyes gleaming with confusion and worry, confusion at seeing the amount of Atlesian knights, or so he was told what they called, in front of their dorm, worry at seeing her friend panic and sink into a dark depression. Yang couldn't contain her confusion, voicing her concern vocally. Okay, Weiss, what is going on here? Blake, are you okay? Hearing a rumbling growl in her throat, Naruto noticed the daggers Blake was staring at the man. Her bow bristled, and her eyes dilated, her eyes shifting between him and Weiss, receiving the confirmation she needed. Her posture was almost threatening toward him and protective of Weiss. There seemed to be a history between them. He would ask about that later. Naruto knew there was a story there. As they stepped within glance, he almost winced at the withering glance he received from Glinda. He could see her annoyance with the dapper man and the situation at large. Her expression was livid as she crossed her arms, and her eyes darted in their direction as they strolled upon the scene. She didn't want them here. The dapper man, surrounded by mechanical drones, held a superior air to him, the condescending glint in his eyes as he gleamed over everyone present. Especially toward them as they arrived, his vision singling out Weiss in particular. "Ah, there you are. Enough of this foolishness, my dear. If you had only listened from the beginning and stayed home, this would not have been an issue." Naruto repressed a scowl at the tone the man took with Weiss. Seeing her flinch and scowl, the gnashing of her teeth and the bitter resentment in her gaze, yet struggled to meet his gaze. Naruto was feeling a little on Blake's side. It did seem like she had a feral side to her. He knew this kind of person well, and he despised them. He was reminiscent of the Fire Daimyo and Madame Shijimi, but far more put together than either. That smug, arrogant, socialite attitude to him. A wealthy elitist. Naruto wanted nothing more than to put the man in his place. Least he had a place to start with to interrupt whatever this was. "Ma, these things are currently banned after the attack, ya know." Naruto motioned, waving his hand at all the knights. "Heard with all the fancy tech all whatnot being hacked, they didn't want to take a chance. Not so sure why you are acting tough with the stuff around when they can turn on ya so easily. Even the tech dude has disabled all without complaint." His eyes fluttered for a mere moment, his bravado wavering, before it returned with a simple scoff and slight wave of his hand. "Poppycock. I simply pay the fine for such a troublesome expense. Being unguarded, here, of all places. My word, I would never. Are you calling my students and myself inadequate?" Glinda's voice quivered threateningly, causing the man to stiffen. "Jack, make no mistake, what happened here would have happened in any kingdom. It was calculated and coordinated. Atlas would not have been any safer, and given how you pride yourself on your technology, the city could have fallen." Glinda purposely let those words sink in before taking a more measured tone. Seeing the man known as Jack now had her undivided attention. "This is a Veil law, even your general is following it. Now, deactivate them if you don't mind. I'll have James return your property to you when he returns to Atlas." Gnashing his teeth, seeming almost unwilling to cave to her demands, Jack scowled as he with his scroll, with a simple swipe and tap, the knights twitched and slumped over. He sighed, his sharp eyes seething as he glanced over at Glinda, but briefly, the foulest glint was sent in Naruto's direction. And Naruto only felt a slight pang of satisfaction. 1 point. "Fine, I'll make this quick then. I don't want to be here any longer than I have to be," Jacques bitterly snapped, his scathing gaze shifting to Glinda and focusing solely on Weiss. "Ignorant of my calls and messages as you may be, my dear, come, we shan't daily here any longer. If you wish to continue these foolish ambitions, we will discuss them later in much safer confines." "What? No, I refuse," Weiss responded frantically, finally gritting the resolve and bearing the brunt of her father's gaze with her own. "I made my decision when I first left in the fall last year, and it has not changed. I wish to stay and continue my training here despite what has happened. That is no longer on the table, Weiss. Circumstances have changed," Jack snorted, glancing down at his daughter. "Whether or not Ms. Goodwitch likes to admit it, this kingdom and academy are no longer considered the pinnacle safe havens and premier learning facilities they once were. What happened here was broadcast for the whole world to see. No one sees Veil or Beacon as the rays of hope and light to lead the way anymore. Isn't that right, Glinda?" Glinda snarled under her breath yet bit her tongue. She refused to take the bait, yet no answer was worse, and she knew it. A beacon of hope remains, ready to be shown to the world as they stand strong and united after the attacks, resilient and determined. Naruto's voice resonated, his eyes shining brilliantly as he drew Jack's attention toward him. "The kingdom is still standing, and the academy's teachers and students are leading the charge. They may be miserable, downtrodden, and beaten down, tired, worried, and anxious, but everyone is working together, helping each other, and doing what they can to make life as normal as possible after what happened. A shining example to the world, wouldn't ya say?" Naruto ended his point deliberately, carefully watching Weiss out of the corner of his eye. Jacques' mustache twitched with mild amusement before scoffing at the delay. He hadn't the time for a philosophy debate, especially with one such as this boy, even if he had a bit of tongue on him. He could crush him later. Precisely. His eyes narrowed, hearing his daughter's voice, focusing toward her. seeing the light within her eyes brighten further. He repressed a snarl that he wanted to express at seeing her like this. Did she buy this dribble? What did this place do to her? Oh, he would have to retrain the girl. Or perhaps, now was the time for her brother. I learned and experienced so much in my time here. Weiss began to speak, her speech slowly growing in volume as she stood proudly with her friends. I've learned to accept my limitations, learn to trust and work with others, accept differences, even annoying people. I've had experiences that have changed my outlook and disposition. Why did I feel singled out when you said annoying people? Ruby questioned, squinting her gaze toward Weiss but smiling widely. You were, Ruby. Young bit back a laugh at her sister while she glared at her, while Blake rolled her eyes. It was both of you. It is why you are both dolts or idiots. Blake cleared the air with a mutter, causing Young to choke on her spit and Ruby to laugh, vindicated. Weiss repressed her smile as her eyes passed by Blake, crossing Naruto briefly. She gained strength seeing his reassuring smile before returning to her father, regaining her confident demeanor as she stood poised with them at her side. I've learned so much here. I cannot leave, father, this is where I belong. Her world shattered, seeing his lips curl into a smug grin. He huffed a confident retort in response, seemingly bemused at her response. Oh, is that so? His immediate tone caused flags to rise for Naruto, Weiss flickering eyes, her shaking head. This was not going to end well. Glancing back behind him, he scowled. He didn't want to have to use this. You really are like your sister. Dear me, whatever shall I do? Jack sighed in whelmed defeat, waving his hands exasperatedly. Two baby birds leaving the nest, leaving your dear mother sick and worried. Guess that leaves your brother now. Whatever would happen to her if something were to happen to him? No, Weiss shook, terrified at where her father was directing the conversation. You wouldn't. Weiss. Yang reached out to her friend's shoulder, attempting to comfort her. Why does this feel like this has gone south suddenly? I've done it once before, haven't I, dear? Jack responded earnestly, causing Weiss to depress and hang limply, the light fading from her eyes. Weiss. Ruby grabbed her friend's arm, pulling her back as she started to walk forward absently. Weiss. What are you doing, Weiss? I am sorry, Weiss muttered under her breath, glancing over to her friends before looking up at her father, slowly marching toward him. I'll come home. I apologize for the trouble I caused you. Weiss. Blake cried, jumping between her friend and Jack, a yell echoing from her lips. You are sick. Do you not have a caring bone in your body? This is your daughter, you monster. Those eyes. Jack pursed his lips, his eyes tinted with intrigue. Would you, by chance, be a belladonna girl? I am. Blake bellowed thunderously, proudly designating who she was to him. Oh, the cosmic irony, Jack droned, rolling his eyes, now officially annoyed. First, your father and his pathetic organization caused me so many problems over the years, costing me so much financial woe. Because your business practices are barbaric. The bottom line does not equate success. Nicholas understood that, Blake viciously retorted, spitting at the ground while Weiss' eyes shone briefly at the mention of that name. That's why he worked the mines with. Don't you dare mention that failure's name. Jack snapped before turning his head and haughtily. That man couldn't make a dime until I took over the business side for him. A people's person he was, but a businessman he was not, and his family was in shambles for it. I turned the SDC into what it is today. And Remnant is worse off for it. Blake yelled as Yang joined her side, Ruby attempting to lead Weiss away. You tell him. Enough of this tripe. Jacques, fed up with the diatribe, turned his ire back onto Weiss and scowled, motioning toward the limo. Weiss, we're leaving. I tire of this. I am sure your mother would love to hear of all you have done, and well, your brother. Without a word, despite cringing at hearing about her brother, Weiss slowly slipped from Ruby's grasp, walking toward her father again. Weiss. Hey, I thought. Do you trust me? Those words snapped Weiss out of her trance. She looked up and into an ocean of blue eyes. An outstretched hand was held forth toward her once again. A confident smile, such a strong word for someone she hardly knew. But, she accepted his hand. Yes, an awkward moment passed after Weiss accepted his hand. Nothing happened. He did nothing. She did nothing. They just stood there, awkwardly holding hands. Weiss. Jacques snapped, annoyed at the further delay, as he had a servant open the limo door for him. We are leaving, and that is final, come. Yes, coming father, Weiss responded, causing several heads to snap back as she released Naruto's hand, heading towards the limo with a prolonged, deliberate stroll, emulating a defeated posture as he entered. What the? Yang called out what she saw and wanted confirmation as she looked around. Am I hearing things or? Yang, Naruto whispered loud enough for the others to hear, glancing over at them, need you to play along here. Oh, Ruby's eyes flickered in realization, a devious glimmer coming over her face before her expression changed, and she tried to stop Weiss. Weiss. Damn it, Weiss. Think about this. Blake added in dismay, standing at Weiss' side as she stood at Weiss' side as she was about to enter the limo. Think about everything we went through. What you told me. Please don't leave us. You were doing exactly what I was doing. You were just trying to escape. We can help. I know. I am so sorry. Weiss closed her eyes, hanging her head as she slid in. About time. Jack sneered as Weiss looked away and began to rant as the door closed. We are going to have a serious talk when we get. His words were muffled as the door closed by the servant closing it and heading toward the driver's door. They all stood by, watching aimlessly as they drove away, eyes following the limo as it faded on the road until it vanished. Then, all eyes drifted to Naruto expectantly. What was that? Yang blinked and poked Naruto, expecting Weiss to fall out of him at any given moment, surprised she hadn't shown up already. That was not Weiss, the fact that he was fooled by it all. You do realize you just let go of one of the prisoners that you brought back? Glinda's eyes glinted with disapproval, her arms crossed as she looked back at him. You do realize they are working with her, which, by proxy, means. I let one of my informants go, Naruto interrupted, tilting his head and grinning before giving a reproachful expression, but I don't think you have much to worry about. She's coming back. She asked for protection. Does that sound like someone that is working with the enemy? Or does that sound like someone who is trying to get away from them? Glinda scoffed and shook her head but glared daggers straight into his eyes. Do as you will, but if they hurt them, I will come after you. Fair enough. Naruto shrunk back, taking her words to heart. Whether or not she could do it did not matter. He learned well from his master. Never scorn a woman less earn thy wrath. Brought her, boss. A new voice echoed, and everyone's attention was drawn to it. Only for Ruby to narrow her eyes at one figure walking toward them and widen at the other running. Oh, we're gonna be in so much trouble. Weiss panted and hugged Ruby before moving to embrace Blake and then Yang. The moment he finds out, he will storm right back here. Yeah, trouble, Ruby muttered, her eyes focused on the immediate threat of the silver-haired intruder and ready to dial up her locker to summon Crescent Rose to her side. Hey, not here to fight Red. Mercury held up his hands passively before poking a thumb over at Naruto. You can say we're on the same team now. The big guy over there offered a deal to us that we couldn't refuse, even if I couldn't believe it. M took him up on it, and, well, I go where she goes. What? Ruby's eyes flickered before her head snapped toward Naruto. Naruto. They. Hey, I get it. Naruto took in Ruby's ire, expecting before explaining, but don't you think he should be given a chance? And his partner. Many people were hurt by their actions. Ruby pointed toward Mercury scathingly, her eyes seething as a glow began to shine within her eyes, a glow Mercury immediately recognized and stepped away from. People died because of their actions. My friend, died. They will serve their time through the work they put in, Naruto simply stated, and they will be worked. But that's not fair, Ruby exclaimed, her eyes shimmering with rage while her body trembled. Life is not about fairness, life is about perseverance, to continue to keep struggling and fighting back against everything life throws at you, to stand back up and punch it in the face with a damn smile on your face, you know. Naruto asserted, causing Ruby to shrink back in stunned silence while everyone else looked on and gasped. Unable to find words, she shifted her eyes back and forth between Naruto and Mercury, her thoughts muddled, and a hollow scream left Ruby's mouth as she roared and stomped away, frustrated. Ruby. Yang went to follow after her sister noticed she walked into the dorms and could hear the storming steps through the building. Let her be for a moment, then go to her, think she needs a moment to sort everything out, Naruto sighed, hanging his head and running his hand through his locks. Besides, we have a few problems to run through. Like my father when he realizes that isn't me and returns here, From what Naruto said, she will likely stop the illusion just as he's returning to Atlas. When he finds out he was tricked, Weiss grimaced as her eyes glimmered with tears. To think he was willing to disavow me to ensure I would come home. We didn't ensure anything by the bait and switch. Hopefully, he doesn't take that as a sign that you weren't willing to come home and a sign that more nefarious methods were used, so we're gonna need to confiscate your scroll. Naruto gnashed his teeth before his gaze turned to Mercury, if he is gonna believe it. Oh, let me play that role. Mercury broadly smirked, cracking his knuckles, his eyes glittered with glee. You said make me work. Nah, you are giving me something I want to do. Gah, can hear RWBY from down here. Yang winced at the volume of her sister's voice before sighing. While that's all good, that doesn't solve the problem. If he comes back here, I'll handle him. You need to be gone. Glinda spoke, garnering attention. Your team and Team JNPR are among the few remaining teams on campus since the evacuation. We don't plan on opening Beacon for this semester given what happened and will allow students a year of transfer to other academies or outside studies. Right, that's why you've suggested everyone leave campus on evacuation day. It wasn't recommended to come back. Yang placed her hand on her hip. The only reason we haven't was because Weiss didn't want to go home. What happened to RWBY? And well, Naruto here. Wait, why is Blake here? Didn't you want to go home? Just now, it sound. Let's not bring that up. Blake's bow twitched, and her eyes shifted toward Naruto, remembering he had caught her and brought her back to the evacuation site. I am here because. What an excellent idea. Yang, Glinda's voice sounded amused, drawing horrified golden eyes to her. You should go home. Blake, take all of your friends with you. Golden eyes flickered and dilated in terror at the mere suggestion. The horror and realization she was powerless to stop the engine that was started as all eyes laid upon her expectantly. She had to bring all these people she cared for home to her mother. Along with a few others. To her father. This was going to be the worst day of her life. The heat was overbearing. There wasn't a cloud in sight to shield from the sun's rays. The salty sea breeze hung in the air, the humidity and vapors making the heat unbearable. Seeking shade on deck was all one could do, or head to their bunk to escape the unrelenting sun. Very few of the ship's passengers were on the deck, seeking the cabins inside for refuge. A yawn escaped his lips, his eyes hazily gazing upon the horizon while leaning against the railing. The heat never bothered him anyways. This was nothing compared to the Suna Desert when he wore his jumpsuit. That was a mistake he never wanted to make again. With him now heading to a city on the coast of a tropical island. He was glad for this new outfit, that was for sure. Although the strange card system for the currency they had here was confusing and something he would have to get used to. The lean card currency system was complicated with both rechargeable and non-chargeable cards. How he missed simple Ryo. Well, you'll do fine in Kuo Kuana if you're handling this sweltering heat just fine. Blake's voice snapped him from his thoughts, and he turned his head to the side as she leaned against the railing beside him, gazing upon the sea. And you dressed light too, expecting heat. I have to wonder what RWBY and Yang were thinking with their outfit choices. Well, mostly RWBY. Yang can shed her jacket. Glancing down, he did have to agree. He had a buttoned short-sleeved white-collared V-shirt with orange trimming, unbuttoned halfway down for some air ventilation, loose black pants strapped with an orange belt and tapped at his ankles. He didn't bother with his coat, which he left in the room he shared with Emerald and Mercury, didn't feel like wearing it in this kind of weather. Blake was smartly dressed as well, but was to be expected. She was heading home, she knew what to expect. A modest black sleeveless crop top with diamond-patterned straps, her weapon was strapped across her chest with a belt, black fitted pants and white belt. He did question the thigh-high purple boots with gold lining but figured that was her fashion. His gaze was drawn to a cross-shaped scar on her abdomen, displayed due to her midriff being exposed, noting it seemed relatively fresh. Her bow was gone as well. While he wasn't taken aback by the cat ears when he saw them, as there was far more drastic and weird appearance where he came from, it was still odd she was covering them up. He wanted to ask about that in her scar, however. She was bleeding through her bandages when he found her, so he was curious what it was from. Every scar told a story. I am giving RWBY her space until she's ready to talk. No use trying to force anything until then. Naruto glanced at Blake before flicking the sweat from his brow and sighing. I get it, I would have been pissed at someone doing the same thing to me in her situation. I actually agree with you. Blake cut Naruto's assumption off, shaking her head. We've been trying to get her to come out and talk to you about it so she can figure things out herself. She needs to learn the harsh lessons of what it takes to be a leader and how difficult it actually is. Scrunching his brow, mildly surprised at Blake's staunch, Naruto let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Her turned around and leaned his back against the railing, turning his full attention to her. Sounds like you are talking from experience there. Oh, right, your father was the leader of the White Fang. And as the current chieftain of Kuokuana, Blake's ears flattened on her head before hanging her head, which is part of the reason why I came out here to talk to you. There is a lot you will need to be informed of. Chieftain, man can't get a break, can he? Naruto chuckled, hearing he went from leading an organization to leading a village, but he couldn't help but feel he would do something similar. Then he frowned, noticing the shift in her voice, embarrassed posture, and scowled. Wait, what do you mean part of why you came out here? I get needing to know about your culture and all that. Don't know enough about this world. I get that. Ya know, what else am I missing? It's Weiss. Blake fidgeted and rubbed her shoulder under his scrutinizing gaze before sighing. You don't know this, but the White Fang and the Schnee Dust Company over the years have a complex history. With her father. No, I don't believe it, Naruto sarcastically responded, catching Blake off guard and causing her to snort with laughter. Tell me something I couldn't figure out on my own. After hearing what you said to him, I think I might have a bit of a picture. It's a global problem. The smile on Blake's face from her snort faded before she exhaled and glanced over the horizon. Racism is a rampant problem we have had to deal with over the years. He is one of the faces of the issue first due to his platform and status, how he treats not only workers but especially his finest workers. Naruto scrunched his brow and repressed a scowl. That melancholic tone as she spoke reminded him way too much of his youth, and he hated it. If he was stuck here for a length of time until he could find a way home, one way or another. If there was a way back, perhaps he could do something to help combat this rampant hatred. If there was one thing he was good at. So, back onto the topic of Weiss, Blake turned her attention and focused directly on Naruto. The White Fang has a considerable presence on Menagerie. My father may be the chieftain there, but their sway is second to none. Think shall be targeted. Naruto crossed his arms, a deep scowl adorning his features. I know Shelby, I know how he operates. Blake repressed a hiss, taking a moment to calm herself, and breathed. I have a history with one of the high-ranking members of the White Fang, one I am not proud of. Don't know when he was promoted. Former operative, Naruto genuinely asked, gauging her reaction. With your sense of justice, I wouldn't blame ya given the context of what I know. Yes, unfortunately, Blake admitted, looking away shamefully, wincing as she briefly traced her recent scar before shaking her head. Given who she is, it would already be an issue. Humans, while welcomed in Menagerie, are often ostracized and looked down upon. She'll be in more trouble because of who she is. Everyone's going to recognize her because of her features. They're that recognizable. Naruto tilted his head curiously, getting the vibe that this felt like a clan. I could tell she and her father had resemblance to one another. Which is worse because he married into the Schnee family. By right, he should have no say in their affairs, yet he has all the power somehow. Naruto swallowed his spit as Blake snarled, her golden eyes vividly glistening with fury. What the hell was Nicholas thinking when he handed over the company to him? I can only guess he thought his daughter was happy and his company was doing well. Naruto's eyes flickered in horror at what Blake said. That man wasn't even a part of the Schnee heritage. Yet he shared distinct features with his daughter, who apparently inherited them from her mother instead of him, yet shared some resemblances with him. If this world had inter-clan relations as well. So, we should let Weiss go on her own very often while in Menagerie, is what I am hearing. Naruto recovered as smoothly as he could before his eyes glinted at Blake. Are you, for that matter, if you have issues with one of the higher-ups, that sounds like it could be a problem. Who, if I had to guess, is the one that gave you that scar when I picked you up? I gave that away just now, didn't I? Blake shrunk, tracing her scar once more, cursing herself for giving any tells, before straightening and nodding with Naruto's assessment. But I agree, I don't think any of us should be alone. It will make this trip hectic, especially with the odd numbers, but we should always be paired up with someone at all times, just Weiss in particular. A sliver of a smile crept on his lips, Despite her aloof and distant attitude, he understood her quite well. She was trying to do right by her friends, and was haunted by the ghosts of her past. In a way, she kind of reminded him in a way of someone. A far gentler version of that someone. One still on the road to her recovery, though. Like all of them, Naruto flicked his hand through his locks, a sigh escaping. He hadn't solved his issues, yet he was attempting to solve other people's. Well, he wouldn't be himself if he wasn't. Funny enough, I think you might be the only one to get away with being alone, Blake giggled, puckering her lips as she crossed her arms. When I first saw you, I thought you were a faunus. Those whisker marks confused me and your scent. Well, Naruto scoffed, his birthmarks helping blend in the faunus culture, or at least being misidentified, would be a mixed blessing. He was sure of it, however, it was still something he couldn't harp too much about. You okay? Naruto blinked, noticing Blake's face went flush, and her eyes darted away. You went beet red. Hold on, what is this about my scent? Wait, Kurama. Explain. Oh, my dear boy, you've always had it, it just never came up before. Let's just say that, together, we radiate dominate energy, and she, on an instinctual level. Damn it, Naruto cursed, palming his brow and dragging his hand down his face. Oh, fantastic. Thanks for the late as usual info. You didn't ask, therefore you shan't receive. Blake said nothing, ignoring the strange looks they received from onlookers. Tucking her head, she knew who he was talking to, embarrassed of what she had just let slip. She didn't mean that. There was just a natural pull like any. No, no, no. A boisterous voice echoed, drawing their attention to it. A blonde bombshell panted as she sprinted from the underdeck, looking at them, eyes wide in horror, panting exaggeratedly. I am too late. Blake, no. But I wanted to have fun with him, but you, this isn't how I want this to happen. What are you going on about? Blake narrowed, her lips pursed as she followed the broken fragments of her partner's words. And her eyes flickered lividly at what she heard. You what? Blake spat, causing Yang to stumble from Blake's snarl. Is that what this is about? I wasn't even out here, you were trying to, both. Yang Xiaolong. Damn, she's ambitious. I like her, but the fire in the cat girl. Ignoring the inner monologue of Kurama watching the events, Naruto stood dumbfounded. He knew Yang had been hitting on him, he would have to be blind not to notice it. While he still had doubts in his life, and he felt love for Hinata, Kurama brought up many valid points he had been feeling. Then there was the nagging pit in his stomach and the what if. Of if this was permanent. So, he had purposely ignored her apparent attempts, yet, here she was, admitting out straight forth. To her friend while admitting she had feelings for her friend as well. How was she expecting this to go down? There was no way this would end well. And the look in Blake's eyes. Naruto. Blake slowly turned her attention, her golden eyes glistening with indignant fury. When we arrive in Kuokuana, I want to show you around the town at night, give you a first-hand account of my people's culture, then, maybe stop and have a nice dinner. Naruto turned his head awkwardly, forcing himself not to lean back when she closed her eyes, and a sickeningly sweet smile crossed her expression. She was being spiteful, yet, he did want to know more about her and her people. And Yang really brought this onto herself. So, is this a date then? Naruto stiffly chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. Yes, Blake nodded, holding her hands behind her back as Yang watched on, distraught at the events unfolding before her. A date sounds lovely. Leave me alone. I don't want to hear it, Yang, I just don't. Groaning, rolling her eyes at the figure buried face first in her pillow, ignoring the rest of the world around her, Yang let out an exhausted sigh. Her eyes glistened with a gentle glint before rubbing her sister's left shoulder before turning around. Okay then, I'll be here for you when you want to talk. Thanks. Ruby's muffled voice resonated, her face further buried into the pillow, refusing to glance in her sister's direction, her cheek flushed. She didn't want to continue harboring these feelings. She simply, slowly trotting away, swaying her hand through her hair lackadaisically, Yang stopped momentarily in front of the mirror in their cabin. She grinned, planting her hand on her hip, admiring her new outfit. Her multicolored tan jacket looked so good over her orange crop top. And the black shoulders matched well with her fitted black pants. Oh, and the tailcoat. And I thought I was obsessed with my look. Oh, you are just jealous, Weiss. Yang swatted at the air, smirking as she turned her attention to her friend and returned to the path she was taking, making her way to a small table within their cabin. I get all the attention with my style, and you know it. Weiss scoffed, her eyes rolling, adjusting her grayish-blue bolero around her neck toward the rest of her dress of the same color, still adjusting to the new outfit. They needed a new look, if nothing else, to change their appearance slightly, but she had more reason to need the change of clothing for a bit of white now. She had grown. Her sizes were all slightly off. That was why everything felt out of sorts in her old outfits. She had to get remeasured so she could get the correct sizes, and that was so embarrassing. Weiss was so glad Blake was there to help her. She, however, smirked at her friend's over-bloated confidence. Her eyes glimmered with amusement. Oh, if you only knew. What's that supposed to mean? Yang scowled, crossing her arms over her ample chest, scrunching her brow, and glaring at Weiss. Weiss flicked her hand through her ponytail and smiled coyly, annoying her friend further. She then sighed, her gaze falling upon the third member in the room, her face buried in her pillow as she lay motionless in her bed. I know Ruby's upset about the situation. Can't say I blame her. Yang scoffed, her eyes flickered softly over to her sister squirming in bed at hearing their conversation. It's awkward. Didn't know those guys were fighting against us during all that. Now that I do, yeah, I am with Ruby on this one. Doesn't feel right to turn them loose after the damage they did. There are always two sides to a story. We don't know theirs, Weiss calmly responded, taking a sip of ice-cold cola from her glass to help combat the sweltering heat, taking her attention away from the novel she was reading. Yes, they committed horrible acts, that was taken into account. And forgiven, Yang exclaimed incredulously, crossing her arms and scrutinizing her friend. How can you be in favor of that? I am in favor of them being held accountable while their talents are being put to use for us, not against us. Weiss set her glass down, her eyes sharply taking in Yang's. Do I have personal issues with the decision? Yes. Do I question him for making it? No. It was something that needed to be made abruptly, and he did it without hesitation, willing to shoulder all responsibilities for his actions. Like a true leader, a muffled voice came from a pillow before further burying themselves within. Is that why you are still so upset? Yang rounded out of her chair and bellowed at her bedridden sister, shaking her fist wildly, that he stepped up when you were supposed to. I swear, I am gonna come over there and flip you out of that bed this instant if you don't get up right now and deal with it. No, it's not just that. Ruby sat up frantically, waving her arms, her face flushed crimson before hanging her head solemnly away. It's so much more than that. I am still mad at him, and I don't know what to say or do. I just feel lost and unsure of myself. Relaxing her posture, Yang's expression warmed. A soft chuckle escaped her lips as she planted a hand on her hip. Then you are like the rest of us. Huh? Ruby snapped her head up, her eyes flickering with confusion. What? Did you think any of us know what the right answer is? Yang flashed a confident grin as she strutted back over to her sister's bed, flopping down next to her. Sometimes there are just decisions that suck, yeah. You got to make the best of them. That is precisely what he did. Weiss followed, standing from her seat, picking up her novel as she strode toward the sisters. You can't hold what he did personally or as a slight. Ruby, it wasn't aimed to hurt you in any way. I think you may need to reread this. Feeling the novel dropped in her lap, Ruby scowled, recognizing it immediately, his fairy tale. I've read it so many times when I was younger. Have you read it recently? Weiss crossed her arms, her fingers tapping along her forearms. Either of you? Nah. Yang shook her head, frowning as she glanced at the book. Last time I remember hearing it was when Dad read it to us. I know Rubes read it several times after, but that was before she was accepted into Signal. Ruby flushed, hanging her head. She hadn't read it since then, either. Then you both might want to read it for yourself, Weiss stated, causing Yang to frown at the thought of mandatorily reading something while Ruby curiously tilted her head in confusion. Perhaps you'll have a different view if you reread it, gain a new appreciation of who he really is now that you are older and your views have changed. An inquisitive expression crossed Ruby's face, her gaze panning toward the book and back to Weiss. It had been a while. You just read the book because you're interested in him, Yang exclaimed, broadly smiling, leaning back and bracing herself on the bed. Can't say I blame you. good-looking, well-built. No, you dolt, that has nothing to do with it. Weiss shrieked, her pale face flushed a vivid cherry. I wanted to learn more about him, obviously. While it wasn't the most informal story I read, it painted his character well enough, and from what I've seen of him, everything he has done makes far more sense. If you say so, Yang grinned victoriously upon seeing her friend's uncharacteristic breakdown, hardly paying attention to Weiss' attempt to reason. She had other plans. So, Yang drew out the word, making Weiss glare daggers toward her while even Ruby lifted her head worriedly, knowing the game her sister was playing. If it doesn't bother you, you don't mind if I ask him out. Yang, Ruby groaned in exasperation, you are aware he's supposed to be engaged, right? That's kind of. So, he's also in another world with no way home. Why not have some fun? Yang responded unflinchingly, unfazed by the glares she received in return. Yeah, I know he's looking for a way home to get back and stuff. I would, too, we all would in his situation. But, and I know this is rattling around in his mind, for it would be bouncing in my mind too, what if there was no way back? What if we were stuck in a world that wasn't ours? Ruby bit her lip, closing her eyes as she turned away, afraid to show her expression as the guilt welled within her. The ever-pervasive thought of having trapped him here with her powers, even by accident, weighed heavily upon her. Silence prevailed, drowning Ruby further in her thoughts. If there was only something she could do. I hate when you have a point yet so crassly express it, show some tact, would you please? Weiss grumbled, finally breaking the silence before expressing her exacerbation with a groan and a flippant wave. Whatever, it doesn't bother me if you go and try and get a date. Good luck, though. Thanks, Yang chirped, sitting up with a grin before it slowly dissipated as she stood up, her eyes dilating. Wait, that sounded sarcastic. What do you know, princess? What are you talking? Weiss retorted before a delighted gleam sparkled within her eyes, and a sly grin crept on the corner of her mouth, motioning a hand to the table, a specific chair with a white tailcoat draped over it. I thought you already noticed. After all, someone is missing, aren't they? Blake, you better not, Yang roared, ripping out of the room, the cabin door nearly coming off its hinges. I thought I knew you better. I thought you were an ab girl. I've been working on mine. So I was right. Weiss smirked at the revelation, a devious plan coming together in her mind before she scowled, and she's one to talk. You don't get things both ways. We all want her. That's just not fair. Weiss. Ruby's voice drew Weiss' attention, her expression fading as she noticed her perplexed face. I know Blake did leave to talk to Naruto, but wasn't that about explaining to him about her home? Since he doesn't know anything about the culture or anything, not that we are much better. Yang doesn't know that, Weiss smiled, placing her hand on her hip. Ruby blinked, further bewildered, before realization dawned on her, and she began to giggle uncontrollably. Oh. Want to follow and go watch? You know it. No. That is not what we discussed, Mr. Schnee. You can go fuck yourself if you think you are seeing your daughter anytime soon with an attitude like that. We are done talking. Good day, you cock stain. A loud voice echoed before Mercury stepped through their open door, taking his scroll from his ear, walking across the rest of the room, opening one of the cabin windows, and pitching it outside. As Ruby nastily scowled at him and Weiss stared at the silver-haired intruder incredulously, Mercury rounded on Weiss with scathing intent. Did anyone ever tell you your father is an asshole? Hanging her head, Weiss turned and sighed. More often than you could possibly know. Everything was so strange here. The people, could she even call them that? They were the strangest assortment of individuals she had ever come across. And she had met her fair share of bizarre individuals. Now in this peculiar shop that this cat wanted to take her to in this town with a talking caterpillar. Butterfly, human thing, hybrid amalgamation. She didn't know if she could hold on to her sanity much longer. Neo was about to lose it. She grinned at that thought. From what she could tell, this place liked to give out names. Would she get a cool nickname if she went mad and went on a rampage? Something like the Seething Hatter. Oh, the beautiful and triumphant goddess of glass. You aren't one for words, I see, the strange abomination before her spoke, seeming very agitated with her presence. She rolled her eyes, flapping her lips while mocking it with her hand mimicking talking. She bore a hole into its head with her stare. No shit, she cannot. She is broken. I am afraid. The cat spoke, his tail swishing behind him as it glanced at the amalgamation, his grin never leaving its face, not even once during their travel here. I brought her here as I feel there is a symptom behind it. I think you could do wonders for her, my friend. I see. The butterfly returned his attention to Neo, who stared irately at him. But she is still lost. I can see it within her eyes. Is that why you brought her to me? Tensing, Neo's eyes shimmered. This thing could tell that with a look into her eyes. It knew her life had no meaning without him. That she was just a husk. That her purpose was all but pointless without him. All she had left was his thoughts and the anger she felt towards those who took him away. And the words she just heard from him. But were those even real? Her eyes widened as a vapor filled the room all around her, filled her lungs before she could realize what was happening. She was too lost in her thoughts to recognize what was happening. Her eyes glowed, glass formed around her. But she stood confused, standing in a damp cave. Her eyes shimmer at two identical figures that were more petite than herself, outstretching their tiny arms toward her. One with long pink hair, the other with brown. Neo trembled at the sight of the two children standing before her, wanting to play, not understanding. Why was she staring at Trivia Vani and her doppelganger, the person who she always envisioned she wanted to be? Her imaginary friend crafted with her powers. Thanks for watching.